pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Thank you, Julie. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Is there support?
I support that.
Thank you, Julie.
Mr. Bucky?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Dracos? Can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McQuiston?
Yes.
Ms. Mermel?
Yes.
Mr. Singer?
Yes.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes.
Mr. Weedman?
Yes. Motion is approved. I'm guessing there's no public participation this evening? None. Okay. Thank you, Birgit. All right. So this moves us to night number 2, interviews number 3 and 4. And we first welcome Venessa Keesler, Deputy Superintendent with the Michigan Department of Education. So Julie, if you'd allow her to come in. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome, Ms. Keesler.
Hi, everyone.
So let me just share our format with you. On behalf of the Board of Education of Lake Orion Community Schools, I'd like to welcome Venessa Keesler to this interview for the position of superintendent. Ms. Keesler currently serves as Deputy Superintendent of the Michigan Department of Education in Lansing. I will take just a couple moments here to describe our format. The interview will take up to 90 minutes. It doesn't have to be 90 minutes, but we're capping our session at 90 minutes. There will be 21 questions from the board. Toward the end of the interview, time permitting, we'll give you an opportunity to ask questions of the board and to make a closing statement. And Trustee Scott Taylor will let us know if time's becoming an issue. We're getting down to the wire just so you can keep the pace so you can complete everything you want to share with us. As the board hears from each candidate and weighs this critical decision, it will be doing so through the lens of candidate profile that was developed with considerable input from our stakeholders. Our intent is to identify the candidate that best fits this profile, which board members have at hand. Audience feedback may be submitted through an online form found on the district's homepage. Although the task of choosing our next superintendent is a responsibility of the Board of Education as representatives of our community, we value and consider the input of our stakeholders in this process. While we are not seeking recommendations as to which individuals should be hired, we would like your input as to the strengths and reservations about each of the candidates. So let's begin. Ms. Keesler, while we have had the opportunity to review your application materials, those watching from home have not. Please briefly review your background and share what causes you to be interested in this position at this point in your career.
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I was very excited to get the call that you wanted to have me in for an interview, and I appreciate the commitment to doing them virtually and your commitment to moving the process forward even in these interesting times. And hopefully now we've had all a little bit of time to practice doing things virtually, so I'm sure I'm a little more savvy at it than I was a few months ago. I'm hoping no dogs bark, though I gave them a stern talking to, so I laid down the law in this house. So a little bit about myself. I am a lifelong educator. I started my career in public education when I was 19 years old, working in the Boston public school systems while I was in college, actually. I worked with a after school and in-school tutoring program and college preparation program. And then I got my first real job as a teacher in the Brockton public school systems, which is another district in Massachusetts, about 20 miles south of Boston. And I taught 7th grade social studies. And I also, at that time, ran the 21st Century Community Learning Centers after-school program for my school, for my middle school, and then for the district as a whole. It was about a 10,000 student district. I think what that part of my career really gives me is that boots on the ground experience of being a teacher. You know, knowing what it's like to see 6 different classes, 130 students rotating through your day, and also knowing what it's like to be on the receiving end of policies from the state, the district, the school. I've always tried to keep that lens with me throughout the rest of my career. From there, I'm actually a native Michigander. I grew up in Corona, Michigan. I don't know how many of you know where Corona is, but it's kind of between Flint and Lansing, and it's a farming community. So I spent my time out east, but then came back home and went to Michigan State University, go green. I wasn't able to deduce from your bios how many Spartans I have here. So, all right, good, at least a few. And I focused my work there, my PhD there, on measurement and quantitative methods, which sounds about as boring as it was. But my reasoning was, when I was a teacher, I knew that there was a lot of data available that could help me do a better job making decisions, helping my students, but no one in my district seemed to know how to use it, where to get it, what to do once we had it. So I really wanted to gain some tools that would help me help educators, myself and others, make those data-driven decisions. I got very interested while I was there in understanding things like the teacher labor market. You know, do we have an adequate supply of teachers here in Michigan? And it also put me in partnership with the Michigan Department of Education. And then when I was done with my PhD, I was able to move, I was offered a position at the Michigan Department of Ed running the evaluation, strategic research, and accountability work. And I did that for a few years. So I was almost the most popular person in the state because I ran things like school accountability, and then became deputy 7 years ago over a portfolio that includes, again, many of your favorites, many of the very popular things, assessment, accountability, all of the educator support, so everything from preparation to certification to educator evaluations, standards, charters, all of the title programs, and I'm our agency lead on our strategic research partnerships. So I have about a decade of leadership and administration experience in all of the major K-12 policy areas that are important to a district, that are important to us as a state, but are also important to district leadership. Something that's often noted about me is that that path I just sketched out for you is not your traditional superintendent pathway. You know, most people have, there's a series of steps that people take. They're a teacher, and then they're a principal, and then they're central office, and then they get to compete for the superintendent job. And I thought that would be my path when life kind of gave me the opportunity to come back to Michigan and do that grad work. So what I think, though, is that while my path isn't traditional, the skills I've picked up along the way, the leadership skills and the management skills, are transferable and critical for leading a district. So I've managed budgets, I've done HR work, you know, dealt with staff and HR work. I'm very well versed on all of the policy pieces that districts have to wrestle with. And what made me specifically interested in the Lake Orion position were a couple of things. One, I believe this year that we're coming into, just like last year was the most unique and challenging year anybody has faced in public education, we're coming into another one where there's going to be a lot of interesting and challenging moments and opportunities. And I want to be part of working with the district to face those challenges, come up with innovative solutions. I want to use my knowledge of state policy, rules and regulations and the bureaucracy to help a district solve the actual on the ground challenge of educating students in a pandemic and then beyond a pandemic. How do we do that? And I was drawn to Lake Orion, two things about Lake Orion that I thought were particularly interesting. One, it's obvious you have a great sense of community as a district. And that's one of my favorite things about public education, the way that public ed and a community can work together to create not just an educational experience for students, but really a grounded and wraparound experience to help them be part of something bigger than themselves or even just their school day. And then the other was your innovation. So your commitment to personalized options for kids, the way you strike a really interesting and positive balance between standardization, so similar curriculums in the elementaries and whatnot, but also allowing parents and students choice in how they pursue their education. And I think those are not common things that you see in districts across the state. And I thought they were something that I'd really love to be a part of.
All right, thank you. Given the immediate challenges of being ready for COVID-19, the coronavirus contingencies, and what is likely to be a significant reduction in our foundation allowance, among other more typical challenges, please tell us how you would hit the ground running on July 20th and ensure that we're fully prepared for a positive and productive school year.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've had people say to me, you're interviewing for a superintendent job right now. Are you crazy? And I, sometimes say, maybe, but no. First of all, I just need to thank the current superintendent and the board. I see that you already have made such great strides in laying out a possible path for 2020-21 school year, the different options, as well as the flow chart of considerations if cases are found. And you've done a great job of communicating that, I think, too. You have an excellent communications team at the district from what I can see. So it's easy to find information. But for me, I think the first thing is build on the work that's already been done. It is dangerous for a leader to come in ever and say, we need to start over because I'm here. But I think it's particularly dangerous coming into a year like this, where the work that people have put in, the experience you had with your continuity of learning plans in the last year, and what the current team knows about the district, parents, teachers, students. So as a leader, building on the capacity that's there. Making sure that we make quick and positive decisions. Parents really need to know what it's going to look like. And I know this district, like many, is waiting on the official guidance from the state, both the state of Michigan and the state of Michigan and the department. I do think this is probably my most unique thing in your very strong candidate pool. Part of my day-to-day work now at the department is working on things like instructional delivery models and how the Pupil Accounting Manual can support them, and teacher certification considerations when you have different staffing considerations, and budget issues and what those projections look like. So I think I have, it's a year where the state and its policy is going to be even more present in the day-to-day decisions of the district. So I think that gives me an added boost, being able to bring that knowledge, the conversations I've been in and led or know about in terms of this year. And the last thing I'll say here, if you had a normal year to onboard, I would be able to spend a good deal of time building trust with people before I had to make big decisions. But I know that's not possible coming into this year. So working hard and being transparent up front, that I recognize that if I start July 20th and July 30th, we release all the details of the learning plan and how we're going to staff it, that's not a lot of time for people to get to know and trust me. So, acknowledging that concern and then working closely with you and with the administrative team to think about how we mitigate that. What kind of personal touches and outreach can I do to be a strong leader, but also sit with the community and say, I know it's an interesting time to have someone new at the helm.
Very good, thank you. Based on your research of Lake Orion Community Schools, what do you believe are the 2 or 3 most critical long-term challenges our district will need to address? And how would your background and skills help us to address these challenges?
So I think I'm going to do 2. I think one is making sure that the models and the options and the education that we're putting in place really is reaching all of our students. And the second is, how can Lake Orion be part of statewide conversations on policy, advocacy, and your legislative outreach? So on the first, when I look through your data, it's very strong. You have very strong data. You are, highly ranked in Oakland County for your graduation rate, for your test scores. You have many innovative pieces in place. You have the Virtual Learning Academy Consortium for kids who like that sort of learning. You have lots of choice in model. And I think that's all very positive foundation. Digging into the data a little bit more, I found that there often is, there's divergence in outcomes when you look at gender or race or socioeconomic status. And so I think when I see a district like Lake Orion that has such great capacity and great strengths, it's how do we elevate, escalate, accelerate, whatever the right verb is there, and hone in on the kids who aren't having the outcome that we want. And I think asking, in light of what's happening and what's been happening in the world, but the focus on it that the George Floyd situation has brought to many of us, also asking, to what extent do we have barriers that we've unintentionally put in place as a district, or ways that we have not succeeded in creating an inclusive and supportive environment for our students? I'm not saying you do or don't have that, but these would be the questions I would want to understand. All you can see from the data is different outcomes. You don't know why. So understanding the why and being willing to have hard conversations about how we address that would be critical to me. You have your strategic plan. It looks like it's relatively new. So again, digging in and saying, how is it working and for whom? And then how is it not working and for whom? So I think, again, for a district like Lake Orion, I don't think it's a, your challenges are so many, where do we start? It is build on the strengths you have, but make sure we get we get our programming to be more effective for all of our students. And I know that's in your mission and vision, this is built in through what you say. So I think there's good capacity there. And then I was very intrigued to see that you had legislative advocacy listed as a specific goal of your district. I very much support that. Having spent as much time in Lansing as I have, legislators listen to districts, they listen to constituents much more than they do department staff or whomever. So I think those are two of the big challenges. On the first, I think my skills, the two things I would bring is I am very good at looking at and understanding data and information and asking for more data and information. Not just what we can quantify in kind of the nerdy research way, but also things like student voice and parent voice, data from surveys, how we can integrate that, listening in focus groups, that kind of ability to put together a plan to integrate a lot of information, and then to work with I have a lot of experience working with teams that once we've identified the problem, how do we implement targeted solutions? And again, I say targeted because I see all over your website lots of solutions, lots of hard work. So where do we need to fill in the gaps? And then on the legislative advocacy point, I would say I have extensive experience with the legislature, both in testifying in committees on a range of topics, as well as the relationship building and the individual advocacy, both with legislators themselves, as well as their staffers and the lobby community. So I think I could be, if that is a goal of the district and something that you'd like to accelerate, I think I would be a real asset and come in with a wealth of knowledge and connections that could help in that area.
Very good, thank you.
Yep.
Our next category of questions is related to district relations, and Scott Taylor will be reading these questions. Scott?
Evening.
Good evening.
Maintaining healthy relationships with school and community stakeholders is important to this Board of Education. Please share with us how you have gone about building and maintaining successful relationships with all members of the school community.
Yeah. I'd like to talk just a little to start about how I build and maintain relationships in my current role, but then I'd like to spend most of it in how I would translate that into a superintendent role, because I think, again, it's a place where the skills transfer, but the specifics don't. So with my team right now, I lead a team of about 250 people across 4 offices, 21 units, and about 100 different work streams. So I say that just to quantify that it's a pretty disparate group of people who do a lot of pieces of work. And it is really important to me to make sure that I know them personally and that I know them professionally. So just briefly, I do things like personal communication, walkthroughs, spending time learning about, asking people to share with me, teach me their job, in essence, teach me their work so that I can always privilege and prioritize their knowledge about what they're doing. And then being very present as a leader and accessible. So translating that into a school community or a school setting, because again, it's different. I think the first step to those strong relationships as a superintendent and as a district, but as the superintendent, one is visibility. I think visibility leads to better accessibility and connections. So being very present in district life. It's, again, this question's a little weird right now when it's like, we're not all together anywhere sometimes, but present on the virtual version of those places. Or when we get back to normal someday, you know, being at the athletic events and the fine arts events and the PTO meetings, and as well as around during the school day. So just being in a place where people can see me and know that I'm there and listening. This is a little silly, but I mean it. I noticed you have a wonderful spirit wear store. So I would be sure to load up on my Lake Orion spirit wear. I was actually very excited. It's very cute designs. So I love spirit wear as a parent, but I also think as a leader, it's a great way to say all the time, I'm Lake Orion, I'm here, I want to get to know you. And then from that visibility with going on to the accessibility and the communication, making sure to have strong communication through the formal channels, you know, email and mail. And again, you guys do this really well from what I can tell. So I'd be happy to, glad to have such a good infrastructure to work with. But then making sure to have those personal outreaches through social media, Facebook and Twitter and whatnot. My kids keep telling me I need to get on TikTok, but I don't know about that just yet. But if we have to, we'll go there. Making sure, you know, I know the superintendent job is not a 9 to 5. So when my phone rings and it's one of you, it's a community member, it's a parent, it's a teacher with a concern, that I'm available. They know that they can get a hold of me and I can be there to support them and help them with their concerns. And then the last thing I would say, in addition to, that's more about me and my accessibility and communication, but as we do our work together, intentionally creating space for us all to be together. So asking questions about who are all the stakeholders, how are we getting to them, how are we hearing their voice? Are there any stakeholders who are going to struggle to weigh in virtually, for example, and need, you know, a phone call instead, or won't come to a physical meeting, but will take advantage of online forums. And I would definitely look to the expertise of the board and the administrative team to help educate me on all those Lake Orion specific groups. But then once you have your list, you know, just always thinking about who do we need to talk to about this, pretty much everybody, and how are we going to set up those communication networks in a way that makes it easy for them to share their thoughts. So.
Thank you. Next question. Please describe how you have successfully engaged district stakeholders, including those directly involved with the school district as well as others in the community, and share how this was a benefit to your district.
Again, I'm going to answer that as a deputy superintendent at the state and use a specific example, but I do think it translates. And you may think this example is about to be really boring, but I will try to make it as jazzy as I can. In 2015, when the federal government reauthorized the Every Student Succeeds Act, I was the deputy in charge of putting together our plan. And one of the things that was really important about that plan was that we needed to engage all the stakeholders. And by that, it was all the stakeholders in the state. So the traditional kind of, we call them in Lansing the alphabet soup groups, the MASAs, MASSB, you know, all the associations. But beyond that, parents, civil rights groups, we needed to work with the 12 federally recognized tribes in government to government consultation. we needed student voice. We needed to work with the legislature and the governor and the philanthropic community. So basically put together a plan for Michigan that allowed not only people to weigh in and react to a plan that we had made, but even a step back to help us co-create the plan from the beginning. So the process I put together for this, and I would use a replicative version of this depending on the scope and size within the district of what we were trying to do. But one is to create the plan itself, to co-create it, have actual action teams where people volunteer to sit on sub parts of the plan. They volunteered to write different parts of the plan. For ESSA, we had 9 of these, 9 action teams that actually wrote different sections, proposed different pieces. And then we had a central committee that was reacting to, that was like a steering committee that was reacting to the plans from the smaller groups. And then we had another committee that was kind of reacting again, almost. It was more from like different perspectives, specifically integrating into those. So a lot of committees, but giving people a chance to be engaged and understand how they want to be engaged. Do you want to help actually make the plan, or do you want to give feedback once it's created? We did multiple rounds of online feedback surveys. We did statewide, like a statewide tour almost, regional groups where we did presentations and took feedback in person. We did focus groups with parents and with students. So again, we created the plan, we reacted to it, then we took it out on the road so we could get lots of reaction, brought it back in for more consideration and negotiation. You know, when you're trying to get all those people on the same page, that takes a good degree of that. So in a district, I would translate that by thinking about who needs to write the plan or the whatever we're trying to tackle. If we're thinking about a new, I hesitate to say a new curriculum because I think looks like you guys have done a ton of work on your curriculum, but let's use that as an example. We want a new curriculum for something. Well, who do we want to do the research on what the curriculum is? You know, teachers and building leaders and parents and content experts from central office, probably some ISD people. And then once they have the plan, who is it important to have react to it? And then make sure to do surveys of parents and students to get that holistic voice.
Awesome. And my last question is, how do we create a community and district-wide culture of continuous improvement, planning strategically and aligning our operating plans to achieve strategic outcomes?
I love that you're asking about a culture of continuous improvement. Again, in my seat right now, I don't work with just one district, I work with all the districts. So I think that kudos to you as a district. That is not a common question that everybody asks all the time. So I appreciate that. I think there's 2 parts to continuous improvement. One is being regularly willing to review your data, your current outcome data, as well as your input data. Not just review it and verify preconceived notions, but review it and be willing to understand that course correction is necessary. I have been, as deputy, one of the main projects that I'm lead for is the Michigan's integrated continuous improvement process. So it's our rebuild of the school and district improvement process. And central to there is this review of data, planning, high quality planning, and then a regular cycle of monitoring and evaluation. And that it's not, you don't evaluate when it's over. You don't monitor and evaluate yourself when it's all over. You do it while you're working so that you can course correct. Too much of education is postmortem. You know, well, we look back and that didn't really work, but we've been doing it for 5 years. So I think that commitment to that regular review of data in a monitoring and evaluation framework. And then I think engaging multiple voices, but specifically students. I think we under ask in education. We don't ask our consumers very often, like, how do you feel about what's going on? What do you think we're doing right? What do we think? You know, they're the ones receiving all this education, but I see we often don't ask them. And I'm the parent of a 15-year-old and an almost 11-year-old. And, you know, of course, because I'm their mom, they never hesitate to give me really candid feedback on what I'm doing wrong in life. But when I sit and ask them about the education system and their insights about how they feel their district could help them better, they're really smart. It's really smart. So I've seen a lot of districts do more work with student voice, student surveys, student focus groups. So I guess that all falls under culture of continuous improvement, regular review of data, monitoring and evaluation, and lift up in that data, lift up how it's going for our end, you know, people using our end product. And then just that commitment to change, you know, something at the department that we do after most projects is we sit down and we say, what went right that cycle, these things. Okay, where do we really blow it that cycle? You know, what did we do poorly with that grant? How can we do it better? You have to have trust. That can be a hard conversation to point out your own failures and others, but I think if you build good trust and you can have that conversation absent, you know, accusation or passion, it really helps you as an agency get better and better, or as in this case, as a district, get better and better. So trust and a culture of feedback and willingness to use the data to help drive our improvement.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next category of questions is related to political awareness, and Trustee Nate Butke will be asking those questions.
Hi, Ms. Keesler. Nice to meet you. Thanks for taking time to talk with us tonight. You mentioned in your comments 2 questions ago about the Every Student Succeeds Act. Would love to get your perspective on the impact you feel it is having on Michigan school districts.
Yes. So how much time did you say we had for this interview? I'll try to limit my comments. Federal accountability policy for far too long has focused on labeling and sanctioning. With the intention, it's label, sanction, and support, but we rarely get all the way to support. Support is underfunded. Support's not the political piece. So, you know, again, I've worked in accountability, which is not the only part of ESSA, but it's really the part that gets the most play because it's the part that people, the same thing under No Child Left Behind, AYP got the most play, priority focus. Like these are the things, they're not all that's in the act, but they certainly get the lion's share of the attention, unfortunately, because accountability shouldn't be what's driving. What should be driving is teaching and learning and the interaction of students and teachers in the presence of content and the social emotional supports and wraparound services that we need to provide Michigan kids so they can be, like your mission statement said, they can be ready for the challenges of today and tomorrow. So nothing about federal policy really supports that right now. We have tried in Michigan under ESSA to develop the partnership district model, which prioritizes for those districts who have that persistent low performance as measured by these systems, which has its own flaws, which I can get into. But once you're identified, stop thinking that the labeling is going to change anything and recognize that there needs to be a series of systemic supports that go beyond the school and reach into the community to help these districts reach their outcomes. If they could have fixed it easily, they would have. They're struggling with really, really systemic challenges. I think federal policy around assessment and accountability does not take those realities into account. ESSA is better than its predecessors, but it's still fairly restrictive. So I think then as a district, like if I were to transition to a district, I would, and I think about Lake Orion too, I would make sure that we were working hard on our standardized assessment. You know, let me take that back. I would make sure that we were working hard on the educational opportunities we are delivering to our students. And I believe then assessment follows. I would also want us to be regular participants in the conversation about the ways those systems do reflect what's happening and do not. Many accountability systems are reductive. They reduce a school down to a couple factors. Again, our most recent one, we've tried to add more factors in, but it's still very challenging. And then I wouldn't advise that we get overly hung up on it as a district. You know, I think we do our best. We use those as pieces of data, but Lake Orion is much more than its index score or its scorecard rating. It's much more than that. And so I wouldn't say don't care about it, but I also wouldn't say care exclusively about it. I also, one last thing, sorry, Trustee Butke, this was a fat pitch right across the middle of the plate for me. So I think in Michigan, with the schools of choice, we have much more open schools of choice and charter policies than most states. So the impact of that negative labeling and sanctioning on student enrollment was more destructive in Michigan than other places. That being said, I think Lake Orion is open to schools of choice, and I think schools of choice should be used appropriately to offer opportunities to kids who want to be part of the great things we have going on here. But I think that was one of the major negative unintended consequences of federal accountability policy, that kids left districts and the money left with them. And then it's very hard to make substantial improvements if you don't have stable pupil membership. So probably more than you wanted to know about my thoughts on this.
No, thank you for that. Appreciate it. We have two more on this in this topic area of political awareness. What's your biggest concern regarding the political climate of education in Michigan? And as our superintendent, how would you advocate for political action that benefits Lake Orion Community Schools as well as public education throughout the state?
Mm-hmm. My biggest concern. My biggest concern is that is bridging the gap between legislators making legislative decisions and educators educating kids. So, and the current group of legislators has much, not all of them, but there are more people who want to listen than some of the prior groups. But many of the laws that districts are living under right now were put through by legislators who had a certain view of education that I don't believe was informed by actual education. And so what would I do? Again, I love that you already have a legislative advocacy arm or component to your district. I wish more districts, I think some districts think, well, we're not a giant district, or we're not one of the, big ones. We can't do it. But the Lake Orions of the world need to be active with your legislators and be active in Lansing. So I would jump right in with what you have going. Would certainly want to devote my time and expertise to carrying that message. Would love to bring my connections. So again, I know many of these people personally at this point from my time at the department, and I'm not shy about saying, hey, remember me? Now I'm someplace else, but you still need a meeting with me, or with my, presumably you have somebody who's a lobbyist on staff, or whom, again, I'd have to get a lay of the land. Oakland Schools is great. Their lobbying efforts are great. And I've worked extensively with them over time, not always on the same side of issues, if the department Oakland Schools didn't agree, but again, really saying to their lobbying team, what can we do and how can we bring this forward? But yes, if educators don't speak up more with legislators, we're going to continue to get laws that are tone deaf about what's actually happening in districts and in schools. I would most like to see us actually change some of our laws, like the educator evaluation law and the read by grade 3 law. I think those are two that are particularly, educator evaluation is, while it had a good intent probably when it came about, it is a paperwork burden that is not helping anybody do better as a teacher. Even though helping teachers do better is a really important goal that we should pursue as a district, but that law is not strong in that area, and has, teachers often cited as something that makes them unwilling to be in the profession, and we cannot afford to lose more teachers from the profession. And then the read by grade 3 law, while it's been critical in getting some momentum in the state around literacy, the department has never, and I have never personally supported the retention piece of it. We know that's, again, a reductive, punitive policy enacted on kids that's not supported by research. So.
Thank you for that. You touched on this and would love to dig a little deeper on the impact standardized testing has had on teacher accountability and our education system in Michigan.
Yeah. So you are going to think, this is the assessment deputy, she's going to give a different answer, but what I think statewide assessment is really good for is understanding at a system level, big ideas about how we're doing. So how's a building doing? How's a district doing? And how can we take that data to course correct and self-improve? Where I think these tests and I have said this actually in testimony, so the MSTEP and its predecessors were never built to do teacher evaluation. When federal education policy tied the requirement that you use state assessments for educator evaluation, and states enacted laws to put that in place using value-added models, which were, you know, kind of a sleepy research tool that were good in small samples and in certain things, and said everybody needs one. The test is just not designed and supported for that. And when you use a test for a purpose it's not designed for, the outcomes are inappropriate, they're invalid. So we do not actually advocate that you use MSTEP in your educator evaluations. I think the tie that tried to be made there did more to hurt both assessment and evaluation. You know, we could have pursued a high quality educator evaluation system, and we could have continued to pursue a high quality balanced assessment system. But once you link the two, people were appropriately afraid of using data for this purpose, and it was bad for both. So again, I do believe in assessment. I believe yearly summative assessment is helpful. I don't think it's the be all and end all, but it gives you data. It also gives you data, you know, to your point about legislators. There are certain legislators who, if you can't show them some hard data from something they believe to be an objective source, they won't listen. So, but I think summative data alone, without benchmark data, without formative data closer to the kids is, you know, use your analogy. It's a stool with one leg, or it's a triangle with one angle, or whatever. It's just an incomplete part of the picture. And again, do not support using them the way that federal policy and state law have suggested they be used for teacher evaluation. Data from teacher evaluation should, if you're going to require data, objective data in teacher evaluation, it should come from sources far closer to where the actual instruction is taking place, that are more able to pick up the nuance of what's happening. A yearly summative assessment is not appropriate for that.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Sorry, you gave me a chance to put on my wonky policy hat, so.
There you go. There you go.
Love it.
So we're moving to the next category is leadership attributes, and our trustee Dana Mermel will be reading these questions for you.
Hi, Dr. Keesler. It's nice to meet you. Thank you for your interest in Lake Orion. The first question I have is, please describe your typical style of leading and talk about situations in which you might vary from that style.
So my typical leadership style is, this isn't just a buzzword for an interview, it's real, it's very collaborative. Again, I watch this happen in districts. I've seen it happen in different situations where the new leader comes in and they're like, well, I've got this plan, and I've got this way we make a plan, and I've got these ideas, and we're going to do them. And instead of understanding the system as an existing system that has both healthy parts and probably some parts that could get better, they just, education sometimes wants to do a blow it all up and start over. And I'm like, well, then we just have rubble. Like, we don't need more destruction in education. We need to be a little more nuanced in how we do this. So as a leader, I like to start by saying things like, tell me about what you're already doing. Tell me about what else you've tried. Tell me about why it didn't work. Tell me about what you think we should do. Give me the pros and cons. I like to empower my team. You know, a lot of expertise sits in a lot of places other than the top chair. And as a leader, you get further. What's that adage? Like, you want to go fast, go alone. You want to go far, go together. It's a little cheesy, but I think it's accurate. You know, to think that I have all the best ideas and the only best ideas is just not true. So I want to always get the best ideas out of my team and create a culture where we can say to each other, you know, I think that idea is really terrible, both, you know, up and down the bureaucracy and laterally. That's not always easy, but with my team now, I ask those questions and then I model letting them tell me my ideas are terrible. And they do. So, but that if we move forward with an idea, I know they didn't just say it was good and then later be like, well, we knew that was going to fail. So that's the kind of leader I tend to be. You know, I know the hierarchy exists for a reason, and I'm happy to make the tough choice, but I'd rather make a decision that we can all agree to. So when don't I use that? One, when we've talked and talked and talked and a decision has to be made and we need to stop wasting time, I say I'm going to consider all this information and it is my job to make a call, and then it's my job to own it, for better or for worse. If it's a terrible decision, if it's great, but we can't sit here and dither forever. And, I need to be the one to say we're doing it this way. The other time that I don't, it is when the pace of things is moving too fast to allow for it. So I imagine this spring, your superintendent had to make a lot of very quick decisions about school shutdown and continuity of learning plans and safety and health. There may be some of those situations coming into this next year. If we go back with in person and then there are hotspots and flare-ups, you might need to, again, hopefully we will have talked through protocols and ideas, but certainly when health or safety or an immediate decision needs to be made, you just need to make the decision. You can't call a committee together and ask everybody their opinion when it's something that has to happen right now. And again, I'm comfortable with that when it happens. I understand the need, and that's why you have somebody who's the leader, not just a committee in charge of everything.
Great, thank you so much. The second question I have is, how do you lead in situations where you don't have official authority over the people involved? Have you been in that position before in your career? And if so, how have you handled it?
Yes, I have. So one of the interesting things about working at the department is that people like to think we've just got authority coming out our ears, but we actually have very little true authority. It has to be pretty specifically vested to us in state legislation or federal legislation. So it's a lot of, especially in the stuff that's more exciting to work on, like the literacy essentials, the work of the early literacy task force, or some work where social studies standards is another good example, where again, the board had the authority to adopt them. We had the authority to convene a group, but it wasn't like we walked in and said, these are the standards, what do you think? We really had to sit at the table in a equal sort of way and facilitate without demanding. And then in my, having been, my parents like to joke sometimes that I was born a leader and was bossing people around when I was 3, but since a whole lifetime of always wanting to be in charge, but not always officially being in charge, has given me a lot of opportunities to lead as a colleague instead of as the boss. So what do? One is be really clear about what goals we're working toward. And if there's an opportunity to co-create those goals with this unofficial group, that's better. If you can't say I'm in charge and this is the goal, but there's 5 of you and you all need to decide. Being an active voice, but also being an active listener. So that in this team, you're not going to be able to flex authority muscles. So you have to actually flex interpersonal, relational, and know how to kind of barter and trade. So if someone's really committed to a piece that you don't love, but you don't hate, but you have something you're really committed to, being willing to say, okay, could we find this common ground? Could we come to a solution? Like I said, being a good listener, being transparent, being willing to, this is something I think I picked up in my time out east, that sometimes serves me well here and sometimes does not. The East Coast is just much more direct. So people say things like, well, I don't like your idea. Whereas here we get the mid-Michigan nice, like, well, I'm wondering if that idea couldn't be better if we whatever. And you're like, okay, they hate that idea. But one of the things that I do when I'm in that unofficial authority situation is try, while being nice, to also be direct about what I think and what I feel and propose a solution, as opposed to just say, well, I'm not sure about that, but bring something to the relationship. And what you're bringing is something to add to the discussion to move it forward.
Thank you. My last question is, what are the key elements of a high-functioning board and superintendent governance team relationship? And what are your plans for establishing and maintaining this in Lake Orion?
I've had the privilege of, again, I know my path wasn't traditional, but I have worked with our State Board of Education pretty directly under 4 different state superintendents. And again, with the portfolio of fun that I have, I'm at the board table almost every month. And so I've had a good opportunity to both interact with our board, but also watch 4 different state superintendents interact with the board and say to them things like, well, you know, why did you handle that situation that way? Or how do you build relationships with the board? So I've got different answers. I feel it's like a little bit of a superintendent residency. You know, I'm not the superintendent, but I get to watch somebody else do it and see what works and also what doesn't. So for me, the biggest thing is clear and transparent, transparency and clear two-way communication between me and you. No surprises. I know none of you want to be at, you know, your local grocery store or at the park and have someone say, well, I heard the superintendent's doing this. And you're like, well, that's nice. I wish I would have known that. You know, that is an uncomfortable situation. So being sure to communicate clearly and often, be clear about our roles. So the board sets policy for the district, but the superintendent enacts it and is the CEO or the chief, you know, the chief officer to figure out how to do it and working with the board on those plans. But again, and I saw on your website that the board engages in regular professional learning with MASB, which is wonderful. So everybody doing their job in the governance of the district, as opposed to trying to do each other's jobs is important. And again, if we aren't doing our respective jobs, that transparent two-way communication and relationships help to have the conversation and say, can we do this better? How would I build it? I would love to hear how you would like to build it, but a couple things I was thinking about was regular meetings with the board president, and then I'd like to meet with each of you individually at least once to get to know you and you get to know me, and then set up routines for connection and communication. I hesitate to say exactly what those are right now because I think it's important that we co-create them a little and we understand what will work. So, you know, I don't want to subject you to a weekly email from me if you're like, don't email me every week. I'd rather have some other sort of update. But whatever it is, that it helps support those first goals of transparency and two-way communication. So.
Thank you. Our next category of questions is related to instruction and curriculum, and Birgit McQuiston will be asking you those questions. Birgit?
Good evening. May I ask you first, do you prefer being called Dr. Keesler or Ms. Keesler?
That should be an easy question, right? But it's a little bit of a loaded one. I would have said for a long time, Ms. Keesler or just Venessa, and I still actually probably have that in my heart, but I had someone share with me, you know, that it's a position of privilege to say, oh, don't call me doctor, oh, don't call me doctor, and that pursuing kind of being clear to honor people's titles and honoring people's titles by honoring your own is part of that. So while I'm not still comfortable being called Dr. Keesler and don't certainly insist upon it, I also am trying to recognize and embrace that aspect of it. So in short, please call me whatever you like. We'll be fine with it.
I appreciate that. So I will call you Dr. Keesler, and here's our first question for my section of instruction and curriculum. What experience, sorry for that background noise. What experience and success have you had with closing the achievement gap based on economic opportunities and other demographic factors?
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to address that in a couple ways. When I was a teacher, and I know that goes way back in my portfolio, but when I was a teacher, it's hard to claim like complete success, but I did work specifically to to think about my lesson plans, but then think about what each kid needed to be successful in accessing those lesson plans. And I had, the way my middle school did it is we had leveled classes. So we had, you know, advanced and the middle standard and then the basic. I can't even remember the exact labels. So I maintained a commitment to giving everybody the same lesson plan in terms of expectations, not changing the expectations by level, but then acknowledging that the pacing, the depth, sometimes the timing, the resources, did a lot of project-based learning. And I knew in some of my classes that kids didn't have, some of the classes were much more resourced, and so they could go get project supplies and they could do it at home, and others were not. And so I brought in project supplies and we had class time and after school time. So I felt like I was reasonably successful as a teacher in trying to make up some of the resource gap or the opportunity gap. When I look back, what I didn't fully realize and what I also would have been ill prepared to handle from the classroom is that aspect of opportunity gap as much, you know. So it's not just different outcomes, it's different inputs entirely, and different kids coming to school with much different readiness to learn, different supports, and different ways that society supports them. You know, that wasn't as clear when I was a teacher. But again, I still think I tried really hard to meet students where they were without changing my expectations. At the department, we have talked a lot about the achievement gap. We certainly have a lot of data on the achievement gap. The partnership model is one of the things that I've worked on that I would point to as being something I think that actually has potential to work to close that gap by investing in a different way in our lowest performing districts. But in all of this, I acknowledge that as a state level, continuing to use summative assessment data and say, look, there's still a gap. It's, what's the analogy? The measuring the pig analogy, like you can keep weighing the pig, but it doesn't change anything. Maybe that's a terrible analogy. So we've started to work on not just quantifying it as an achievement gap, but thinking about inputs, resources, and the ways that systemically the education system and society at large is giving kids a lot less opportunity to achieve, whether that's quantified by a test score or graduation or other outcomes that are harder to wrap our arms around, like that they're safe and secure and they can walk to school without fear, and you know, all of those pieces. So I'm sorry to say that I don't feel like I can say, well, at the state, I've closed the gap. I wish I could. I wish we could do a better job of that. I hate that in education, that seems really like a persistent challenge. And it's one of the things that makes me most interested in being a district superintendent, because I think district is where the action is. That's where you can actually make the decisions to do more than measure the gap and bemoan its existence, but get engaged and say, well, okay, that data is not destiny. We don't have to stop there, and we need to dig in and create different supports. Be willing to say that some of our programs or language or outreach or whatever is disadvantaging kids in ways we probably didn't intend. I don't think most educators put programs on the ground intending to leave kids behind, but we know that that happens anyway. So that like laser focused commitment to saying we have to get to all of our kids, no matter how many options we have to put on the table, no matter how many supports we have to bring, we have to do this for everybody and stop just seeing an achievement gap, get in front of it and change the opportunity and access, close that gap, and then you'll see the data follow.
Awesome, thank you. My second question is this. How have you balanced the need to challenge the status quo in education through innovation and reform with maintaining and building on what is working?
Mm-hmm. So, I think, so I'm going to answer that in two ways. One is, I think that at the state, one of the ways that we've challenged, that I have challenged or been part of teams that challenge the status quo and work toward innovation is trying to, again, it was a little wonky, but thinking hard about what are the levers that the state can pull. So the levers available to change education outcomes are different at the state level than the district level, than the classroom level. Sometimes what happens in the system is people at the state try to pull a district lever, or district people try to pull a classroom lever, and that's the wrong lever. So what do we have at the state that we can do? We need more flexibility in the preparation, certification, and placement of teachers. So I've been leading with my team an effort to think differently about what teachers need to know and be able to do and how they demonstrate that. And over time, that's a slow process. You know, that's not like we change it and tomorrow every teacher is trained differently. Thinking creatively about, I mentioned this before, but thinking creatively about what can actually happen in terms of instructional delivery models through current pupil accounting rules. So it's not even like change the pupil accounting. It's like say, okay, we could do this, this, and this, right? Or if this was tweaked just a little bit, districts could do this. So trying to, and keep an eye on what we have authority to change. So if it has to be a legislative change, that's a much slower and harder process. But if it's something we hold in administrative rules or it's superintendent decision, we can do more. So thinking about opportunity, places where there's opportunity to change the status quo, while advocating for big change, like bigger change, something like I said earlier, we'd love to see, I would love to see personally, and the department would love to see the Read by Grade 3 law repealed and the EdEval law repealed. But if people won't bite on that, what can we change? Well, we can suggest that we change we're doing legislative advocacy right now to remove the requirement to use MSTEP, for example. If people don't want to get rid of the whole law, can we give them something else? As a district, so the second way I want to answer it is, as a district person, I would want to, I'd want to build good trust and spend time listening and educating myself. And in my 90-day plan, you know, I had a whole learning component, and I really do mean that. I wouldn't come in and say, here's where we're innovating tomorrow, because there's a good chance that that's not innovation, it's just a bad idea. But then once I had a better lay of the land, I want to see us build on what it looks like to me to be a record of innovation, to do more. And talking with the team and saying, okay, how on board are all of you? Who's likely to be on board? Who's not on board? And being willing to have those tough conversations with people who want to have the status quo and say things like, and I do have a good deal of experience with this at the state. I'm often the person who says the thing nobody really wants to say, or the tough fact. So say, I understand that you prefer the way we've been doing it, but we've done all this background work and we need to change. And here's how we're going to change. And can you be on board with that or not? Again, I sense in the district a great deal of commitment to innovation. So I don't know how many of those tough conversations I'd have to have, but you know, sometimes you got to help people get over the hump and see something new that's coming.
Okay, thank you for that. And the final question for curriculum and instruction is this. How have you addressed the needs of college readiness while also providing high quality, relevant, career-focused opportunities for students?
I think this is a great question. I think this is a really big area of opportunity for districts right now. You know, it's been a pendulum. So there was a heavy career focus, and then it was all college, all 2- and 4-year college, and that was it. And anytime it's all anything, that's not working. We have to recognize that students need to take steps after high school, that a high school diploma alone is not sufficient in today's world. Again, I keep thinking about your mission statement, educating our students for the challenges of today and tomorrow. A high school diploma is not sufficient for the challenges of today and tomorrow, but what kids do beyond high school is not one size fits all. What I've done now in my role at the state is we've worked on a number of expanding out the programs that allow kids to earn steps toward their next thing while still in high school. So things like dual enrollment, career tech ed, the AP classes, IB classes. I'm missing one. There's 5 of them and I always know them, and I'm forgetting one that we've worked on, but this range, early middle colleges, thank you. This range of options that help kids while they're still in K-12 take some concrete step toward a possible future, either to continue on it or to be like, no, that's not what I want to do. You know, again, I have a 15-year-old who's like, how do I decide what I want to do with my life? And I'm like, I don't know. You don't, not for a while. So just take good steps and see what you can figure out. And we've worked closely with the Michigan College Access Network to make sure that we as a state help with those transition pieces, help more kids to think of themselves as college ready, and that college isn't just four-year university. College is trade school, college is community college, college is technical training programs. At the district, I would love to understand more. Again, I love your course catalog at the high school and all the options that you have for kids. Would love to understand more about what the community thinks we need more or less of, what kids think we need more or less of, and be, again, really willing to have as many options on the table for kids as we need, which is probably all the options. And I couldn't tell from the website, so this is I just didn't make it to that part probably. I don't know what your current capacity for investment in counselors is, but make sure there are adults in the schools who can really work with kids, and that those counselors are well trained in not assuming what a child's next step is based on what they come in with. You know, so you're not, we have all heard the horror stories of people saying, well, my college counselor told me I couldn't even go to college. And now I'm, you know, the former state superintendent, Brian Whiston, said he had a high school counselor tell him he just wasn't cut out for education and wasn't going to make it very far. And then he became state superintendent. So obviously there's many counselors who do a wonderful job, and but making sure that we have good training for staff and resources for that.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Birgit. Our next category of questions is in the area of finance, and an important one, no doubt. And Trustee Treasurer Jake Singer will be asking those questions this evening.
Good evening, Dr. Keesler.
Good evening.
Please describe your experience with budget development and financial management, including making difficult budget cuts.
Mm-hmm. So the bulk of my experience with budget development is from the state. And budget development at the state level is an 11-month process. And I know it parallels in a lot of ways how districts have to work with budgets. So at the state, what we do, and again, I'm involved in all of these pieces. I am not the deputy in charge of finance, so it's more of the content piece of the budget development as well as the details, as opposed to like the actual budget development. But first step that we always do is we say, what are our key priorities for this year? What do we really need to invest in? I always think that's an important question for a district too, especially coming into a year where there's, you know, big projected cuts, to say, what are the things we just can't cut? What is most critical? What are our most important pieces to keep moving? The big rocks analogy, you know, what are the big rocks that we have to make sure we have? And then moving forward, start to understand the sources of revenue. So again, at the state, it's revenue estimating conference and any projected cuts. I think at the district, it's much the same. I know you all are waiting right now on the state budget, which is delayed this year, which is a source of stress for everybody, but also an understandable thing given the realities of the COVID-19 situation. So asking, what are the sources of revenue? Did they go up or down? What are the fixed costs? And then, so from the revenue, what expenditures do we have, and which ones could flex? Which ones are going to go up? Which ones are going to go down? Which ones are harder to move? And then at the state, we have a whole convoluted process of proposals for change where we put in requests for more money. That takes a lot of time. You know, you make the proposal, and then you pitch it to the governor, and then you pitch it to the legislature, and then you negotiate for months and months. I don't see a strong corollary to that in the district, except in those months where we know where this is the legislative advocacy part. So if we know the department is advocating for an investment in literacy coaches, let's say, or whatever it is, I would want to be part of helping them with their advocacy for, yes, put that money into the state budget so that we can then, as a district, put it as a source of revenue in our budget. And then eventually the budget's written and we flow it out. So my experience is there, and then I do a lot of the operational management of my operational budgets within my division. So monitoring spend plans and vacancy factor and checking with the directors. I will say up front, you can see on my resume, I'm not the finance officer. I see you have an excellent finance officer. That's great news. I would become his best friend very quickly because it's not my area of expertise, but I also know enough to know it's not my area of expertise and that you need to go find the finance officer and work closely with them. But I do have a great deal of experience in understanding, you know, the inflows, the outflows, the pieces. I see in your board materials that you have a standardized process with at least 2 amendment periods. That probably will be different next year given the way things are. So I would learn your process. You spend a lot of good time listening to the chief financial officer and all of you to make sure I understood exactly how we went through this process in Lake Orion. So that's the bulk of my experience and how I would translate it into this situation.
Thank you. What opportunities do you believe budget limitations present In tough financial times, what are your 3 top priorities?
I love how you phrased it as what opportunities do budget limitations present. That's a positive way to say it. My top priority, my number one top priority, and I believe this would be true of the board as well and current leadership in the district, if I'm right, based on what I've researched, is to preserve services close to students first. So you start with cuts the furthest you can away from students. So you need teachers, you need support for students, you need students to have great instructional experiences, but also great, so my second priority would be we don't just automatically start cutting extracurriculars and arts and music and drama and whatever. I think that it's hard to sell sometimes, but between what the research shows us about the importance of those things in not only the academics of kids, but their social emotional health. And what these last few months have shown us about the profound disconnection that can come for students when they don't have their quiz bowl team or their swim team or whatever it is that helps them connect to the community. So my number 2 priority would be don't just automatically assume we cut all the fun stuff, no matter what. And the third priority would be to find the balance between immediate crisis and bad cuts and long-term plans. So I think it's possible to overreact and decimate for what is perhaps a short-term problem or perhaps not. I know too, the funding situation for districts right now is so fluid when you don't know your per pupil, but all this federal money is coming, but how much is coming? And there's all these funding streams. So it's a very challenging time, I'm sure, to figure out an operational budget, but try not to lose sight of the forest for the trees or whatever analogy you want to use. Say we have to get through this year, but we also have to think about this as a long-term enterprise and not cut off all of our strength to make it through this year with our budget line. And again, without spending time with the team, with all of you, I don't have more specifics, but I would be asking that question. Like, is this a cut that we would make this year that would hurt us too bad in the future? And if so, what else could be possible?
Okay, and the final question I have for you is, what ideas might you explore to develop more revenue streams for Lake Orion Community Schools? Have you had success in procuring additional funds for your district in your career?
I've got a couple ideas in this area. One is making sure that we're getting every dollar that we can through the state through both competitive and formula grants. Making sure we have some sort of resource either on staff in the district, or a strategy I've heard someone use is they have a grant writer who works basically on commission. If the grant comes through, they get paid, and if it doesn't, well then too bad for you. So again, I need to understand how we're set up, but a commitment to going after grants that come through the state and the federal government. Sometimes the feds run grants straight to districts, and making sure we were watching for those. It looks like you have philanthropic involvement, so I'd want to understand more about that, but certainly would want to cultivate investments from philanthropy, both in our immediate area and maybe more statewide. And part of that is understanding what each foundation wants to invest in, what's important to them, and see how that matches up with our mission. So having a specific part of our strategic plan that is fundraising with philanthropy. The third one is, and again, I've been thinking a lot about this coming into this next year. And when you read stories and people saying, well, we're going to cut all the sports or whatever. And I always think, don't cut everything until you ask the community what they could do to help. I think as a community, we don't always want to see our kids just go without the things they love. And I think we sometimes as educators don't ask that question enough. Now, it may be we ask the question and the community can't or won't, or there's not a good vehicle, but I think we owe it to the kids to say, well, we could have a track team, but we can't afford the bus this year because of cuts. So the bus is $1,000. How can we help? Who wants to sponsor $1,000? And that goes with my kind of 3B is great relationships with the business community and being willing, as superintendent to say, how are you supporting our district and how could you support our district and how can we work closely together for that? Those aren't, the community support and the business probably isn't a vast revenue stream, but again, I think that second priority of mine of don't cut everything that kids love, maybe having to piece it together. And also, some business investment in different districts has been huge. You know, we can think of examples where that's happened. The last one, I'm sorry, I did not have enough of a chance to dig into. I see you have some sort of community foundation that I imagine does fundraising and whatnot. So just understanding that and how it works currently and how we could elevate or escalate that. Those are probably my main brainstorms, but now you've got me thinking. I'm trying to, you know, other sorts of partnerships with other districts or the ISD, you know, something there, but I'll stop because now I'm just thinking out loud and that's not great for an interview. So those 5 are probably my main brainstorms.
All right, thank you. And then our final category this evening is related to staff and personnel. And Trustee Steve Dracos will be asking you those questions. Steve?
Thank you. Well, nice to meet you, Dr. Keesler.
Nice to meet you.
I have a few questions, but very important questions regarding staff and personnel, as Mr. Weaver indicated. My first question, ma'am, is please describe your most successful experience in building a high-performing work team.
I have to say, the team I have right now is, in my career, the best team I've had. For this reason. So I've got 4 directors who report directly to me. They're all people who are deeply expert in what they do, but they're also people who are built into the vision of what we've been, or bought into the vision of what we've been trying to do in my division. So what I did, how I helped build that team was I like to hire on potential as well as talent. I think hiring on potential is particularly important too, as we try to diversify and expand our workforce. You know, sometimes we think we're being fair and impartial, but we keep hiring the same person. And that usually means that who we think needs to get the job, or the barriers we put up or the questions we ask are in some way disincentivized or getting us to a place where we don't want to be. So, you know, being willing to hire on potential, being willing to understand your own hiring practices and biases. And then, like I said, once they're hired, that's just the first step. I work really closely with my directors. I trust them and empower them. They have a great deal of latitude and freedom to be experts in their area. And I think the third thing that's probably important is I don't micromanage, and I give them responsibility, but I also don't play gotcha games. So if I say, you run this and I trust you, and they run it, and I think, well, I wouldn't have done it that way. You don't for that up at that point. You know, you either say you're in charge and you let them be in charge, or you say, we're going to work on this together because I have some really strong views about this. And I should say too, my team as a whole, my whole division, I do think about the people I supervise. My direct reports is, you know, when you're saying which team did you directly hire, it's them. But I think about the whole division really as my broader team. And again, I would have to say that team's very high functional right now. And we have a great interpersonal relationship. And I prioritize what I've done with them, in addition to respecting them as educators and professionals and backing them up. I've also prioritized being human with them. When I first became deputy, I thought they wanted me to be like really professional and just hit them with knowledge all the time. And pretty quickly learned that they actually wanted to know if I was like a real human being. And, you know, did my dog run away? Yes. Did my kids act up? Yes. Like what happened? Because we're trying to be in this space as humans first, and then as professionals and as experts. So I'm now prioritize that candor and that openness with my team, and it helps us a lot have that trusting relationship.
Well, thank you for your thorough answers. My next question is, please speak to your experience in labor relations and working with employee unions, and describes the nature of your relationship with union leaders. Thank you.
Again, my current experience at the state, we do have a number of unions that are run through the Office of the State Employer. And so I don't actually have the opportunity to liaise directly with the labor leaders, but we, you know, I'm familiar with the different classifications and civil service and union laws and rules, and understand the importance as a leader of really knowing that, so that when you're working with your team, you honor the contracts and honor those regulations. And honor what they represent too, that they're not just there to be a list of rules, but that they're negotiated on behalf of the employees. In terms of this role, because it would be a little new, I would prioritize getting to know the labor leaders, especially coming into a year like this. I think we just can't understate the importance of having a good relationship between superintendent and the labor unions, knowing that it's going to be a year of tough choices, and we have to have a good relationship. So meet individually, listen, be accessible, and be transparent and honest. You know, work together as professionals together in the same space. And always keep kids at the center. You know, it can get contentious, I know that, but again, I truly believe educators all care about doing what's good for kids. Just sometimes we have different opinions on what that is. But if we can keep remembering that shared value, that helps.
Thank you so much. My final question is as follows. How would you interact with central administrators and building principals in a district of our size? And how would you strike a balance between giving them the support and autonomy, excuse me for mispronouncing, you know what I'm referring to, they need in order to lead effectively while holding them accountable as appropriate and necessary?
Mm-hmm.
And I can repeat the question if you like. I'm sorry.
No, I think I got it. So again, when I'm looking at the website, looking at your org chart, and then just looking at the work, seems like you have a really strong central office team and a strong leadership team throughout the district. So I would, on the pragmatic side, and then we'll get to the autonomy side, meet individually with each of them, each of the central office administrators. I mean, obviously I will anyway because of work, but specifically take time to get to know them individually, and then with each of the building leaders, and then spend time watching them work and understanding what they do. In my early time at my early time at the district, I would need to prioritize their expertise more. You know, I think until I learn more about how they work and how the district works and how it's stressful to have a new leader come in. So you got to give people some space to show you how they work and get more data points from them. But then over time, I'd use those strategies I've used in the past of relationship building, setting clear goals and expectations, making sure they're clear on them, giving them space to meet or not meet. And if they do meet, give that great feedback. And if they don't, have that tough conversation. So I do think it's possible to not micromanage and be in people's business, but also hold them to a standard and hold them to the high level expectations, even while privileging and prioritizing their own roles as leaders within their, you know, their spheres of influence.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Steve. We'd like to take a few minutes now, Dr. Keesler, to provide you with an opportunity, any questions that you might have for the board, and if you would choose to make a closing statement.
You know, I think in the interest of time, I will ask one question, and then
Sure.
I have a lot of questions, but I'll ask one tonight, and then we'll share some closing thoughts. So my question would be, and it's actually a question you all ask of me, but how are you thinking, well, it's related to a question you asked of me. How are you thinking about the challenges of bringing a new superintendent into the district in this time?
Well,
or the opportunities, maybe I should say challenges and opportunities.
I think you're right. There are going to be challenges and opportunities with the core team that we have in place. I think it's an opportunity for us and for the new superintendent to come in and meld those ideas together as we explore some territory that we haven't done before. And the flip side of that coin will also be the challenge of doing just that, exploring some new territory that we haven't seen before. I would open it up to the floor to any of the other board members to also respond to that if they wish. Hearing none, we'll just, I hope that answers your question. It's going to be a challenge for all of us, but it represents an opportunity as well. Dana?
I'm sorry, I just wanted to say, having a superintendent who is very much aware of the challenges and knowing that the challenges are not just in getting our kids safely to school, but that there's other challenges in dealing with the community and how we're parlaying that and how we're keeping people calm from a social emotional standpoint. And realizing that, and then being able to have the skill set to hit the ground running, because this is going to very much be initiation by fire. And I don't think it's just a new superintendent, even an experienced superintendent. This is going to be a very interesting initiation period. So just being able to have the skill set and the confidence and the leadership to be able to be like, okay, let's do this. And we're going to do the best we can. And if we have to make some changes because it's not working, I'm willing to say my idea wasn't great. And we're ready to, you know, talk to like the stakeholders and find, you know, new ways to do things.
All right, thank you, Dana. Any others? All right. Well, I'll turn the floor over to you for your closing thoughts.
So this was a great slate of questions, and I certainly took full advantage of the time, so I don't have much more to offer. But I would say in closing, kudos to you for the work you're doing in Lake Orion, that you have done, the way you communicate to parents and to stakeholders, the options you put on the table for kids, and even the questions here and the point that Trustee Mermel just made about it's going to be quite a year regardless. I appreciate all of that acknowledgement from the board. I do think if it's a year, you know, obviously I would be both a new superintendent for Lake Orion and a new superintendent, but it's a year where prior experience might not be as helpful because it certainly won't look like the last 20 years or the last 5 years. I'm a creative educator. I'm really committed to student success, quantified in multiple ways. And I'm really passionate, and I hope that came through in my interview, about this year, not just getting kids in schools and keeping them safe, to your point, and not just doing literacy and math, although I think that's critical, but the dislocation and the trauma that kids have experienced not being able to be part of their education community, we need to remedy that to the best of our ability. Knowing that it won't look perfect, it won't always be perfect, we'll have to be willing to be flexible, and that public health is critical. We don't want our kids and families to be hurt or, you know, sick, but we have to keep an eye on what school means to us as educators, to our students, to our families. And I would love to be part of that problem solving in Lake Orion. So I appreciate the time you took to listen to me tonight and all of your excellent questions. And I hope that I'll get another chance to spend time with all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Keesler. We appreciate your interest in the superintendent position at Lake Orion Community Schools. The board is interviewing, as you know, 6 candidates. We plan to conduct our second interviews next week, and we'll let you know Thursday night where the process stands and if you'll be joining us again for an additional interview. We thank you for your participation and wish you a good evening.
Thank you. Good evening to all of you.
Thank you very much. All right, so we are at 7:28. We're going to take that 10-minute time out. And thank you, Scott. He's on it. And we'll resume at 7:38. So let's take a time out here. Working on that connection.
John, might you be able to contact him to see if he's having some difficulty?
Yes, I'm texting him right this second.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right, hello, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep, we're good. All right.
Sorry about that. I wanted to use my cell there, and it takes just a moment to enter in the password and meeting ID.
Got it. Well, thank you. Good evening. And on behalf of the Board of Education of Lake Orion Community Schools, I'd like to welcome Todd Bidlack to this interview for the position of superintendent. Mr. Bidlack is currently Assistant Superintendent of Learning Services for Bloomfield Hills Schools in Bloomfield Hills. I will take just a moment to describe our format. The interview may take up to 40 minutes. We have a hard stop at 90 minutes. We have a hard stop at 90 minutes, but we don't have to use that much time. There will be 21 questions from the board. Toward the end of the interview, time permitting, we will give you an opportunity to ask questions of the board and also, if you choose, to make a closing statement. Trustee Scott Taylor will let us know if time is becoming an issue and we're getting close to the end, so you can kind of pace it and give you an opportunity to have that closing statement. As the board hears from each candidate and weighs this critical decision, it will be doing so through the lens of a candidate profile that was developed with considerable input from our stakeholders. Our intent is to identify the candidate that best fits this profile, which board members have at hand. Audience feedback may be submitted through an online form found on the district's homepage. Although the task of choosing our next superintendent is a responsibility of the Board of Education, as representatives of this community, we value and consider the input of our stakeholders in this process. While we are not seeking recommendations as to which individual should be hired, we would like the community's input as to the strengths and reservations about each of the candidates. All right, so that being said, let's begin. Mr. Bidlack, while we have had the opportunity to review as a board, your application materials, those watching from home have not. Please briefly review your background and share what causes you to be interested in this position at this point in your career.
Well, first, let me thank you all for inviting me to be here this evening. I'm very passionate about education and supporting teachers and really helping guide families and students through a meaningful educational experience. And I terribly regret that we can't be in a room together. I would so much look forward to shaking your hands and sitting in the same room. And it's terribly unfortunate that we're unable to do that at this time. So hopefully throughout the process, if you choose to invite me back, we'll be able to do that. But hopefully this will be an opportunity for us to get to know each other to a greater extent than already the application materials that I've sent. To give you a brief history on my background, I've been a principal of a junior senior high. I've been a principal of one of the largest middle schools in the state of Michigan. I've been a principal of an elementary building. I have taught middle school, and I'm currently in the position of assistant superintendent for teaching and learning. I have degrees from University of Michigan Flint, Eastern Michigan, Oakland University, and I'm currently pursuing a doctorate, which unfortunately, COVID, global pandemic has gotten in the way of my dissertation, but I'm pursuing my doctorate at University of Michigan Flint right now to try to wrap that up. I'm done with my coursework and I'm just down to getting through that dissertation. Why am I interested in being superintendent at this time, and in particular, one for the community of Lake Orion? Absolutely, with a global pandemic, looking at really looking at artificial intelligence as it's developing, looking at the profile of different types of professions as they are coming into a new age. There's no time really like now to be able to lead education. I know that it seems as though this wouldn't be a premier time, but actually there is so much disruption in our field right now that, to me, and it's an exciting time. It is pushing innovation. It is, we are certainly never going to go back to the way things were. So it's nice to be in this position right now in education, and the state of Michigan needs leaders, and they need leaders willing to be bold and to step up and to face these challenging times. This is not a time to be meek. This is a time to figure out a path forward, to be courageous, to remember what your core values are, and to be able to navigate your way through these challenges that face us, everything from the budget to making sure that we're ready for September and looking well beyond that as well. Why Lake Orion? I'm very familiar with the community. I was extremely excited to see this position posted. I have quite a bit of respect for the leadership team that you have in place and your superintendent that will be retiring. I think the community is one that I simply just adore. I am in a really great position to be able to be picky about an opportunity as it would present itself. And I think Lake Orion would be that we would be able to learn from each other, that we would be able to make a great partnership. And I think it's the type of community where I would be able to help lead forward. And I think that, you know, as we kind of move through this interview process, we'd be able to find some of those connection points.
Very good. Thank you. Given the immediate challenges, and you've touched on briefly, of being ready for COVID-19 coronavirus contingencies and what is likely to be a significant reduction in our foundation allowance, among other more typical challenges, please tell us how you would hit the ground running on July 20th and ensure that we are fully prepared for a positive and productive school year.
Absolutely. In fact, I figured we would be talking about COVID. And although I have to tell you that I'm looking forward to, and one of the reasons why I'm excited about tonight is because that almost seems all that we've been talking about in education. And in my 90-day plan, I tried to outline some critical steps that I thought that we would need to be able to investigate in a rapid fashion to be able to really be prepared for what is unknown at this time. As you know, that you know, our outlook is really dependent on two critical factors: the economic stability of the state of Michigan, as well as student enrollment. And right now, both of those are looking like they could be impacted negatively. One of the things that we want to do is be able to look at those different types of models. In that 90-day plan, you'll see that I carved out 3 specific scenarios, which would really be based on risk factors, as well as making sure that there would be an online component for a significant of families that may choose, either because the child is medically fragile or maybe there is somebody in the household that is medically fragile, where they may choose to opt out for next year, in particular at the kindergarten level. So that is an area that I'm tracking closely right now, is looking at those kindergarten projections and those numbers to see what the shortfall might be in terms of what that enrollment or projected enrollment was going to be. So one of the things that we want to be able to do is make sure that we have flexible scheduling, that we'll be able to shift from one reality to another. Of course, everybody wants to come back to school. I want our kids to come back to school. I'm sure your community feels the exact same. And probably what is going to happen, if I were to make a prediction, that some of these choices will probably be made for us as we start off in September. But at some point, that will probably, as it starts to come into sort of a burning out aspect, because it all depends on whether or not we, you know, really experience a second wave, if it's going to be something that is similar to what we experienced this spring, or if it starts to be a wave where really what we're trying to do is manage the how quickly it's spreading. So that's why there are those different models. It's going to be very important to make sure that there's a hybrid model that you would be able to move into and out of. I'm very proud of the continuous learning plan that we put together here in the spring. We were able to get that up and ready to parents right away, and really with the importance of being able to progress learning and keeping kids engaged and meeting with their teachers. And we know, however, that that will not suffice as we come into September if we are under another governor executive order to shut down, or maybe at a county level we're given direction to shut down, which means we're going to have a plan in place where students are going to be able to engage directly and have some more of that face time and more routine and structure to be able to carry that learning forward. So I think it's really important right now to make sure not only are you preparing for those 3 specific categories in terms of what does a remote learning platform look like, what does a hybrid model look like, and then what are going to be those safety and cleaning procedures that would be in place for face-to-face instruction. And in addition to that, to take a look at how many families might be choosing to opt out. There's predictions anywhere from 5% to 25%. And as soon as you calculate that against 7,200 kids and you multiply that by $8,500, that quickly could move you into a budget crisis in comparison to already the state not necessarily telling you what the aspect is going to be even this year, let alone next year. So it's important to have a place where families would be able to move into that realm. There's a provision under pupil accounting. It's called 50D, where you'd be able to admit students. Because if you have a virtual learning platform, however, you're outsourcing that teacher, that's going to be problematic. One of the ways that we're trying to do that is to build an online platform for those families that might opt out for the 2021 school year, but that it's taught by district teachers. And I think that that's going to be critical as we move through this next phase, is to make sure that you have not only preparations for those 3 different scenarios that you may be moving in and out of, but as well as having an online component for families that may need to opt out either a semester or a full year.
All right, thank you. Based on your research of Lake Orion Community Schools, what do you believe are the 2 or 3 most critical long-term challenges our district will need to address? And how would your background and skills help us to address these challenges?
Well, I have been through your financial statements as well as quite a bit of information online through my school data, digging through the website, being able to find those different pieces. I've reviewed your strategic plan and also being knowledgeable about the district. You know, 2 of the things that I would say are really important as we look at this is one, knowing that education is never going to be exactly the same. And what this does is it provides the opportunity to leave some of those practices in the past as we move forward a lot of the innovation that is taking place right now to be able to put that into place. So long term, I believe that now is a great time to be gearing up for strategic planning after the global pandemic has subsided. That would be a premier opportunity to be able to launch that work as you really start to reshape a new vision around teaching and learning for Lake Orion Community Schools. The second one that would fit in with that is looking for those partnerships and taking something like your pathways and looking at those opportunities that students have and really trying to look for those authentic experiences where students can start to engage more deeply in those experiences that they feel are long range for them as well. And within that provides a lot of opportunities to partner with the community in new ways as you start to develop those business partners to be able to really connect the classroom to some of those career pathways. And I know Lake Orion's been already been doing quite a bit of that work and looking to, you know, how would you do the next iteration of that? How would that evolve into a new model? Looking at the World Economic Job Outlook in terms of how it puts together the structure of how business is evolving over time and what the dispositions for that particular industry is going to be looking for 5 years to 10 years down the road, taking a look at the different type of pathways that are available to students and seeing if those type of dispositions, those types of skill sets and attributes are aligned to be able to really kind of set kids up for having success within those fields that they really feel passionate about.
Very good, thank you. Our next category of questions is related to district relations, and Scott Taylor will be asking those questions. Scott?
Good evening, Todd. How are you tonight?
Good, Scott.
So my first question is, maintaining healthy relationships with school and community stakeholders is important to this Board of Education. Please share with us how you have gone about building and maintaining successful relationships with all members of the school community.
Well, first and foremost, I believe you're absolutely right, Scott, that at the cornerstone of any premier school district is building relationships, and relationships is key. Relationships is really what builds a sense of belonging that people have to the district, to their teacher, to their classroom, how families feel in terms of their community, and developing and fostering those. So I think one of the first things is to make sure that you listen, and you listen with intent. People want to be heard, and they want to be understood, and to be able to really experience that, and making yourself available, making yourself seen, being in and out of school buildings, attending events, being out in the community. All of those things are important. And in addition to that, when you're moving into a specific design process around programming, perhaps you're about to make a large decision. A lot of those are coming up here quickly in the fall. It's important to be able to engage all those multiple stakeholders into that design process with you. To bring people in and help design as you move forward really allows for your thinking to be elevated as you bring people in with very different lenses and looking at the same issue, but from a different perspective. So as you grapple with those different types of complexities, being able to partner with the community is really important to do. But being available, making sure that you have connections. In my 90-day plan, you'll see that that was a specific objective that I have. And it was, in fact, the first objective was making sure that we are ready in September for whatever we may be facing, by making sure that we have different models to choose from. But then the second one is building and establishing relationships, especially in understanding where differences lie and where people are really coming from. And so within there, I listed quite a different areas in terms of either an organization or a specific person that I would want to be able to reach out and start establishing those relationships right away.
Excellent. The next question is, please describe how you have successfully engaged district stakeholders, including those directly involved with the school district as well as others in the community, and share how this was a benefit to your district.
Sure, I can think about, really I can go all the way back to, well, I'm thinking of a lot of different examples for the various places that I've been. It's really enjoyable to me to create a process that really liberates people's thinking. And so not only do you want to have a strategy, but you want to have a strategy to pull off your strategy. And so what I mean by that is, for example, in Rochester a few years ago, myself and Cindy Linder, she's the director of technology there, both of us were asked to lead really a facilities review where we brought in multiple stakeholders and we were looking at the strategic plan in the area of infrastructure specifically, and building out those specific engagements for various stakeholders to come in and analyze the facilities and the conditions, as well as projecting out how we wanted to manipulate the physical environment to really enrich teaching and learning. That led to a successful $180 million bond that passed. Here in Bloomfield Hills, doing similar work, we were engaged in a master facilities review, and we've been able to go through different types of constructs, and of course, being the assistant superintendent of teaching and learning and have an interim superintendent at the time, this responsibility to develop this process really fell on me. But again, it's something that I really enjoy, being able to put those liberating structures together and having people come into that and engage in that. And not only did we need to look at the facilities here, but we also needed to look at how we cohort students. So within the proposal that has been delayed to August now. It was supposed to be in May. But what's going to come up in August is a $200 million bond proposal that is going to move this district from 3 middle schools into 2 middle schools. It's going to reestablish the way we think about media centers. It's going to reconfigure our elementary schools, and it's going to put us in a position to make teaching and learning that much richer and be able to elevate those practices that we have in place. So whether it's strategic planning or engaging in developing curricular work, meeting with teachers, probably one of the areas that I enjoy the most is actually the planning of the discussion and how you take people through those different types of thought processes.
Excellent. My last question, how do we create a community and district-wide culture of continuous improvement, planning strategically and aligning our operating plans to achieve strategic outcomes?
Yeah, there are a lot of different approaches to district improvement work and school improvement. This is an area that I'm really proud of in Bloomfield Hills. I would invite you to take a look at our data dashboard that we've created, the different type of models that we've been able to develop in a short period of time to really kind of move into diving into that work differently. There are different types of ways to do that. We're part of a state group called FAME. We just recently got published in some of their work that they're putting together. But I think it comes through really around a model of collective efficacy in regards to specific school improvement work, being able to state the objective and trying to really kind of meet those measurable objectives. I really like the practices around really identifying key objectives and making sure that we have a strategy to be able to achieve that, and also making that visible. I think it's very difficult to take improvement plans and make that work look visible so that other people can be invited into that. And in fact, I think it was just this year that Bloomfield Hills and Lake Orion, we had a couple staff members co-present in terms of models to look at from Michigan Department of Education as an example to chase on that. So I think we would be able to continue to evolve in those practices. And I do view strategic planning a little bit different than school improvement. And here's what I mean by that. Strategic planning, to me, as you start to carve out really kind of what that vision is, what you're planning for, that shouldn't just be about small measures that you're trying to make improvements on. These should be about things that you are about to launch into a moonshot. You are completely rethinking. You have changed your paradigm. You are looking at programming or large-scale nimbleness that you're wanting to recreate or reimagine what either some of the spaces are or what that program is going to look like. Within strategic planning, there can be specific goals that are more improvement areas, but strategic planning is really an opportunity to really stretch a community, to really stretch a school district, and to be able to be bold and courageous in your thinking while doing that.
You're muted, Jim.
Muted. I apologize. Next group of questions is related to political awareness, and Nate Butke will be asking those questions. Nate?
You're muted, Nate.
Oh man, you'd think we'd figure it out by now, but
Exactly.
we're all still getting there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's okay. This is what teaching has been like since March. So you're in good company right now.
Yeah, right. Well, thanks for the grace on that one. And thanks for joining us this evening to have a chat with us. First question for you. What impact do you feel Every Student Succeeds Act is having on Michigan school districts?
So I think really in terms of what that impact it looks like that was really more of an accountability measure where that replaced No Child Left Behind and started to carve out specific areas in terms of how you might assess and achieve different type of benchmarks and requirements within that. More than likely, it changed some of your board policy when that legislation was passed. You have probably already aligned your board policy with that. It may have initiated some rewrites of your administrative regulations. But overall, at this point, most districts are operating under those measures, and that shouldn't necessarily be a significant issue right now. One of the issues that I think really is facing the state of Michigan is probably IDEA and the underfunding of special education program. In fact, there was a recent study in terms of really taking a look at the true cost of educating a student. And that collaboration that was formed put out recommendations that have yet to really kind of be realized. So more than likely at this point, you have probably already initiated and aligned to ESSA, like most districts have. And however, if you're looking for something in terms of legislative feature that you'd want to advocate for, I really think that opportunity is in not only aligning the budget calendar of the district along with the state, being able to fiscally manage your organization in a way that makes a little bit more sense with how the state does that, but in particular with funding around special education students and IDEA.
Thank you. Staying on this theme, what is your biggest concern regarding the political climate of education in Michigan? And as our superintendent, how would you advocate for political action that benefits Lake Orion Community Schools and public education throughout the state?
Well, certainly, I think the two things that I mentioned earlier are some of the driving factors on a district's stability is going to be around the economic stability of the state of Michigan, your foundation allowance that is set for each individual district along with enrollment. And really to set yourself up not only to be really advocating for the items that I mentioned in terms of I believe it's the Michigan School of Finance Coalition that put together, they did that study and put together those recommendations in terms of those specific items. So they've already outlined in terms of really shifting gears at the state level to rework the way schools are funding. That makes more sense. And I think really kind of what we've experienced right now only underscores that need, because primarily we're funded by two specific sources. It's going to be income tax and sales tax. And right now, over the last 3 to 4 months, that is really being problematic in terms of that funding source and the ability for the state of Michigan to be really consistent in that avenue. So I think what I would do is really advocate for a new funding mechanism for schools so we are not at the whim of a economic climate. You know, most districts are just recovering or nearly getting back to their fund equity that they were at before the last Great Recession. And it has taken this long to really kind of pull out of that. And funding has not recovered since that time frame. And it was looking as though within the next couple of years, we were finally going to recover from that last downturn. And here we are again at a very similar juncture. I think I already talked about IDA a little bit in terms of advocacy, in terms of the political climate, and really trying to get our legislators to not take different sides, but really kind of come together on agreeable terms. You'll see that in my 90-day plan. I put in there to reach out to the representative of the 46th district to be able to start developing that relationship so that we can have a direct conduit and be able to advocate for our position and to do that on a regular basis to make sure that Lake Orion Schools gets the funding that they deserve.
Thank you. Last one in this question, what impact has standardized testing and teacher accountability had on our education system in Michigan?
Yeah, so I have very specific thoughts about that. We could probably spend just a couple hours on that. So I'm taking just a moment how I can kind of really narrow that in. The standardized assessment certainly has its place in education. So I don't want to sound as though I am anti assessments or accountability, because that certainly isn't the case. However, those really are more of those are really mechanisms in place to tell you after the fact whether or not what you're doing is working. What you really want to do, in addition to that, is to have a heavy focus on formative assessments so that you can be in the moment and reactionary to what a specific student's needs are. If you're waiting for your scores to come back from the state of Michigan or the SAT or the M-STEP, by then it is too late to have that personal connection with a student. I think the ranking system has wreaked havoc on our state in terms of the top to bottom list, the bottom 5%. I think that's been really problematic for districts in terms of what that looks like. For the evaluation system and how that couples with that, I see that you guys are using Danielson, at least the information that I saw online appears as though you're using the Danielson model right now. That's a model that I'm very familiar with. I think that that's very workable in terms of how you align that to the new requirements of the state and making sure that you're hitting those compliance issues. And I do think that it's important to have a mechanism and timely feedback for teachers. That's very important. As a teacher, you really want that feedback. You want to know, you want to have your thinking stretched. You want to know with your building administrator, really kind of what they're able to observe when they're in the classroom, and it's supposed to guide you into a very rich conversation. I have a tendency to believe that people really kind of excel when you focus on their strengths versus their weaknesses or areas that they need improvement. I think if you focus on people's strengths, their areas of weakness, those come up with them. It's important to identify those, but definitely if it's not, hasn't reached a specific realm to where it's negatively impacting the classroom, it is probably an area of weakness because they're more passionate about something else. They're more passionate about another type of strategy or another type of practice. Being able to focus on that and allowing that person to follow their passion, to excel in that, to be a creative genius in a very specific area, that brings up everything else in terms of performance and those interactions. So I think all of those things are important, but it's also important to put those in a balanced, you really kind of have to tell the story about data in a balanced format. There's a lot of qualitative data and storytelling that you can leave out if you're just looking at that quantitative data. And especially if you want to get into the practice of being able to measure a student's disposition on, maybe you want to measure global dispositions, you want to measure thinking habits, you want to be able to look at someone's ability to problem solve at a high level, you want to measure different levels of sophistication and thinking. That's not always available in those metrics that we're usually used to in terms of state standardized tests. But internally, you're able to move those practices in place as you might want to take a look at those different type of thinking habits and to be able to measure those over time. In fact, at one of the elementary schools that I ran, we developed sophistication ratings for thinking, and we came up with a very specific way, a meta-analysis, where it would inform the work of the strategies that we were focused on to be able to really kind of establish very specific thinking routines and patterns and habits. And we were able to put those sophistication ratings in place using some concept mapping and going through a meta-analysis of what that looks like to be able to inform that work. Without that work, it's very hard to couple some of our other practices to be able to tell us whether or not those achievable outcomes are being reached.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. The next group of questions relates to leadership attributes. And our secretary, Dana Mermel, will be asking those questions. Dana?
Good evening, Mr. Bidlack. Nice to meet you. Thanks for your interest in Lake Orion schools.
Thank you.
I'll ask you 3 questions as well, and here's my first one. Please describe your typical style of leading and talk about situations in which you might vary from that style.
Probably the area where I find the most joy that this no longer feels like work. This is play. I really enjoy being able to build models of what I would refer to as almost liberating structures, where you are really trying to stretch the mind around big ideas. Being able to look at a process in which people move through to be able to come to new insights. And, you know, I firmly believe that there are so many different understandings that are ready and waiting for us. But you have to be ready to come to the point where you can absorb that new insight, where the world starts to change for you a little bit because you understand something in a different way. I really find that experience enjoyable to be able to construct that. So the way that I would describe that leadership model is through a partnership of thinking and investigating, being inquisitive, trying to understand a particular complex issue from multiple perspectives, being able to consider many different facets of something that's right in front of you. Being able to toil with that, being able to pull it apart, and be able to create a strategic method to move that forward, or to watch a practice evolve over time. There's a lot of different ways to go about that, and I would say that that's my preferred leadership style, is to create a format in which we are all learning together, that we're all coming into new insights simultaneously from different perspectives. You can vary from that because obviously what I just explained right there, we do not have time in terms of preparedness around what those cleaning protocols are going to look like. So if we are making quick decisions, I would say that in a crisis, I move very quickly. I lean into issues. I would even say that might be a weakness of mine, is to lean into an issue when I see it, to be able to confront it, to be able to meet it and understand it and really kind of problem solve in that moment. So I vary from that preferred state where it feels very collaborative, where you can build structures that really kind of liberates one's thinking, to also knowing that this particular dilemma doesn't fit within that model. And what we need here and what people need is a decision, and they need clear direction. It needs to be coherent. It needs to be decisive. So I would veer from that if the situation called for it. I would say that I often take different type of leadership strategies dependent on what the situation might call for, and really kind of understanding the outlook from various perspectives or different angles, and choosing a leadership style that might meet that, as opposed to just what my preference is. So I really try to meet whatever the situation is with the type of leader that particular situation needs, as opposed to maybe what is my preferred model.
Great, thank you. My next question is, how do you lead in situations where you don't have official authority over the people involved? Have you been in that position before in your career? And if so, how have you handled it?
Certainly, I think those situations always present themselves. Being in, I can really think of examples at all different levels and positions, going all the way back to a teacher where you're trying to reframe a practice or a structure inside your own school, or maybe developing into building administration and helping your district find its way through really into the future or trying to develop a new program or a new outlook on something, I think what you do is you listen and you learn and you join in for the journey and you find your opportunity to lead. In fact, I would say that one of the things that I am most passionate about is teacher leadership. And I think it's important not only to attend and foster teacher leadership, but it's important to create the infrastructure that supports and maintains teacher leadership as well. And there are very specific conditions that you have to put in place to really allow people to have the opportunity to bring in that voice and decision making. And the more you flatten an organization and be able to use those voices of innovation, and not only having experienced what you described, Dana, but also making sure that others have the ability to do that too within Lake Orion Community Schools, where they can lead from the position that they're in, and to make sure that you're harnessing those voices and you're looking for that area of influence that is needed. And I think there are very critical ways to go about doing that, and to make sure that not only are you nurturing that, but you're actually creating an infrastructure for people to thrive in teacher leadership in different ways.
Thank you. What are the key elements of a high-functioning board and superintendent governance team relationship? And what are your plans for establishing and maintaining this in Lake Orion?
If I try to include some of the hints to what that would look like in my 90-day plan, really kind of carving out specific action steps that I feel would lead to that. I think it really starts with trust. As we grow to know each other, we'll be able to anticipate each other's thinking. We'll know what our positions are or views are. And then our responsibility is to bring that into alignment, to find where that middle ground is, that how do all of us collectively contribute to a specific idea or a direction. That way, when we come to an agreement, what people are hearing is focused direction. They're not hearing different perspectives. They're not hearing it sounding like we are doing two different things, but really that we are seamless and we're on the same page. And the ability to be able to do that work is gonna take a lot of trust to be able to do that. I think with those interactions, we need to be intentional about that. I think transparency and communication, not only with ourselves, but with the community is also a necessary feature to be able to pull that off. It's important to invite other people into that conversation as well, so that we understand their perspectives. So I think that those are all specific attributes, and that's before we get to the logistical components of like a board retreat or how we might handle communication or how we might set agendas or various committees that we'll want to be able to structure in terms of supporting the district. Remembering that the students are at the core of that, and the decisions that we make need to be student-centered, always with the student in mind, and playing out how is this going to impact a second grade classroom? How will this impact a ninth grade classroom? What is that impact going to look like and going to feel like for our students?
All right, thank you. We move on to our next set of questions, and our Vice President Birgit McQuiston will be asking questions regarding instruction and curriculum. Birgit?
Good evening, Mr. Bidlack.
Good evening.
Good evening. Question number one from me is this: what experience and success have you had with closing the achievement gap based on economic opportunities and other demographic factors?
I think that's a great question, Bridget, and I think that that's a focus that everyone should have. I believe that that's a moral imperative to really take a look, not only achievement gap, but really what are the opportunity gaps? What are the equity gaps? almost shifting your mindset from what is a specific achievement gap that sometimes places that responsibility on the child, to really taking a look at what is the equity gap or the opportunity gap that sits here that is producing these disproportionate outcomes that we're viewing. So one of the recent areas in terms of looking at that is to, let's take a look if we don't, if our numbers are disproportionate in for our Black students in our higher level courses, let's go all the way back and take a look at the avenue or the way in which students get invited into that program. What are the implicit biases? What are the systems that are in place that need to be unpacked to be able to widen out larger access points, to make sure that we are giving that opportunity for equity, that opportunity for rigor, that opportunity for learning in a similar format as our other students. So I think it's really important to take a look at those different type of features through not only in terms of what might be disparities between the outcomes, but then taking a look at the system and try to see what are the disparities now within the system that is producing that specific type of disproportionate outcome. For example, you know, one of the strategies that we've deployed is really trying to unleash excellence through equity and inclusion. And one of the primary features within that model is to make sure that we are fostering a sense of belonging, to be able to combat the microaggressions that students might meet on a daily basis that I don't have any experience with, or nor can I truly understand what that's like. But what I can do from my leadership position is I can lean into that issue and uncover those implicit biases, make sure that we're trying to combat those microaggressions as well as disproportionate pathways for students to enter into programming that widens out that field. So it's really important to take a look at those, not only through a data lens, but also through a systems lens.
Thank you for that. Here's my second question. How have you balanced the need to challenge the status quo in education through innovation and reform with maintaining and building on what is already working?
Well, really, that is the best strategy that you outlined in the last part of that question, is you start with what's working well. You know, Howard Gardner likes to say that education, with all its faults in terms of being perceived as evolving or lack of innovation, one thing is certain is that we have a couple hundred years of historical knowledge around how to engage and foster learning. And sometimes I think we can be quick to dismiss some of those features that really sit at our core. And so it's important to be able to carry those forward as you look for new inventive ways. Like I mentioned before, I think what COVID has done for us, it has disrupted education, and it's disrupted education forever. I am not expecting to ever go back to the industry in which I've been working in my entire career. I do not believe that we are going to go back and conduct school as it was before. I know people are probably hungry for that, but I think really what's going to happen is if you take a look at all of those pockets of innovation right now, we're going to be able to carry some of those features ahead. I mean, think about if somebody came to you with the idea that we're going to put every teacher online and we're going to have every teacher do Zoom. I'm imagining some of you maybe until COVID have not been in a virtual board meeting before. So we are all learning new skills and habits that can be exciting as well. But it doesn't mean that what we should leave behind is the connectedness and the humanness, the humanity around education. Education is absolutely a social endeavor. It is people coming together and learning from each other. You cannot replace second graders sitting on the carpet in their morning meeting, coming together, building a sense of belonging, having that connectedness. That does not happen in a Zoom classroom. But there's a lot of features that can happen in a Zoom classroom. We're able to network on a different scale. We're able to nimbly move through different projects. You're able to collaborate in different ways. You're able to use different platforms where simultaneously other people can move in and out of it. So I think really what we're going to do and what's important to us and why I suggested that I think the smartest districts right now are not only focused on preparing for COVID, but they are starting to build a structure and a strategy to launch into strategic planning as soon as people are emotionally ready for that when we are on the backside of this global pandemic. Because now is the time to harness what has been disrupted so that we can carry forward what has been working for us while before we let go of a lot of these innovative practices and take a look at how might we redesign this. Do we have new ideas around seat time waivers? Do we have new ideas around how kids are positioned in different pathways? Has industry changed? I know some industries are probably going to be doing more blended models of coming into the office as well as in a virtual climate. I'm a little bit worried about real estate value on business real estate. You know, what is going to happen to that in the next 5 to 6 years? Are people going to decide that they don't need office buildings? So there are a lot of different components there. So I really believe now is the time to not only be focused on a response to COVID, but also developing a plan to launch into strategic planning as soon as we're through this.
Great, thank you. And my final question for you is, how have you addressed the needs of college readiness while also providing high quality, relevant, career-focused opportunities for students?
Absolutely. You know, this is at the core of our work, and it's always at the forefront of our minds as we look for ways to help children become career, college, and life ready. You know, how do we put in those opportunities and experiences that allow children to thrive into different levels of excellence? It's important for programming to be nimble, to have flexibility in terms of being able to, really what I refer to is really unleashing student agency. How do they come into that process and truly understand themselves as an individual? And then how do you create a pathway that really allows them to dig into an area in a very meaningful way? And I think that that's when the opportunities, so like a recent example is we're getting ready to really launch a new model around pathways, not in the typical fashion that people usually perceive that in terms of capturing CTEs, but really what are different pathways that students can engage in that once they move through that particular pathway in a narrowed, meaningful focus, that really sets themselves up to be more competitive in a college setting as they pursue that career choice. So I think it really depends on the ability to work with building leadership with teachers, to be able to help them design those processes and look for those different types of partnerships, either in the community or outside the community, where we can find those meaningful experiences together.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Our next group of questions is regarding finance, very important. And our treasurer, Jake Singer, will be asking those questions. Jake?
Good evening, Mr. Bidlack.
Hello, Jake.
Please describe your experience with budget development and financial management, including making difficult budget cuts.
Certainly, if you work in education, you are confronted with difficult budget cuts. That almost seems to be our norm often, in terms of how do we repackage things in order to make sure that we're going to be in a very financial healthy position. You know, it is our role to be the financial stewards for the community, to make sure that we are leveraging their tax dollars on behalf of their children in the most effective way possible. It's going to mean bringing in multiple stakeholders when we're making those large programming decisions, so that we understand that what we're doing and what we're leading forward matches the core values and the guiding principles and the beliefs of Lake Orion Community Schools, that encompasses all of those components. It should bring in the insights of local business leaders and also a subset of leaders throughout the community as well. So as we kind of work on those areas together, that really kind of allows us to set our focus so that we are in that internal process of making sure that the resources are going to the areas that are going to have the biggest impact. We know that we're making wise choices around that. Looking through your financial statements, I see that you have an A+ rating with Standard & Poor. I can see through the mechanisms. In fact, it even looks like you're doing your own transparency reporting, that you're not paying for a service to be able to put that together. And what I really appreciate within the reports are the explanations and the narratives that go in there. So you're able to peer into those reports and come away with an impression that really kind of gives you an idea of the journey that Lake Orion's been on and the future direction that you're trying to take. I can see that you've done a great job in terms of trying to reach towards that 10% fund equity balance, as well as managing those bond projects, sinking fund, and all other aspects in terms of how you build that budget in a fiscally responsible way. So in terms of that outlook, I think it's really important to make sure that you're really doing the right things for the right reasons. And that really is what it boils down to. I can tell that you have a very strong financial team based on the reports that I've been through. And I think that that is one of the pillars that you need in any successful school district, is to know that you have a very solid and comprehensive financial team that is very thorough in their work. And looking through those reports, you can really see the evidence as it sits within there, as well as with your rating and the way you're moving through those different projects and the way that that budget process is being built. And what that does is that insulates really what we're after, is to protect that classroom, is to be able to preserve that programming, to be able to make sure that we have students in mind and that we are resourcing teachers appropriately and properly, that we're bringing them into the process with us to be able to figure out how should we be leveraging our dollars to be able to best impact our students.
Thank you. What opportunities do you believe budget limitations present? In tough financial times, what are your top 3 priorities?
So I'm just pausing for a second because I'm asking myself, do my top 3 priorities change in a budget crisis? And I don't believe it does. I think I would still name the same top 3, that it's going to be safety, it's going to be student-centered, and it's going to be supportive for teachers. Without that recipe, it's very difficult for learning to occur. Students need to be safe in their physical environment. They need to feel and of course, we can construe the meaning of safety in multiple different ways. Safety can mean from an outside threat, and safety can also mean that when I walk into this classroom, I feel like I belong. So we can put a very wide definition on that. And so when we go through a budget process in an economic downturn, it's very important that we consider the socio-emotional wellness of our children and that we're preserving that. Without that, it's difficult for learning to progress, that emotions are the rudder that really steers thinking and learning, and that we need to be able to protect that. In addition to that, being student-centered, we need to make sure that that programming is available, that that access is still going to occur, and that we need to be able to resource our teachers to be able to operate in that system and also attend to their social-emotional wellness as well. It's very important for teachers to have the same sense of belonging to the district that they work for, as we want students to feel that same type of sense of belonging to their classroom. So we need to do that in very meaningful ways. The first part of your question, I believe, was around how do you do that, perhaps in innovative ways. You know, I can think of specific scenarios, and the ones I'm going to draw back to is with the Great Recession. And at the time, I was in Clarkston during that period, and the challenge was we were looking to cut, I think it was in the neighborhood of $18 million in 1 year. And we had to be very creative about that. And we also need to do that in a very transparent way that involved other people into the decision-making process and not do that in isolation. That year, we found a way to offer a retirement incentive that allowed us to right size for the budget that we had. And then we also started to reconfigure the programming, and yet at the same time improve our intervention model as a consequence of that. So one small example I can think of, when we used to have, I can't remember the name of the specific class, but we would have maybe 2 to 3 kids in really what was just a homework hour. And what we did is we moved that into being more specifically related to ELA or math, and made that a connection, and then involved more students into that process and collapsed some of those sections. But not only did we save money and we were able to right size for the student population that we had, but we also initiated a better multiple tiered systems of support for our students as well. So that became an opportunity for us to reimagine and revision how we might go about that process, where we actually came away with a better outcome. But it's also important to remember that not all budget crises live in the same type of innovation way. If the state comes through and does a $600 or $700 cut, all districts will be looking at cutting services from transportation to add to the list to whatever it would take to get to that. Hopefully the feds will come through and perhaps treat us a little bit more like the banking industry or the airline industry, and be able to really kind of preserve our state funding so that we'll be able to carry on forward without too much of a disruption. But right now, I think the biggest thing is not even knowing what that cut could be this year, why we are still in this fiscal year. So I think that's a significant challenge in terms of still having a potential budget cut on this budget cycle, yet without really an effective way to be able to counteract anything that might be coming our way. So I don't know that my top 3 priorities would change. I think I would say the same thing as I said a while ago. We're going to do the right things for the right reasons. We're going to stay student-centered, and we're going to try to preserve really the sanctity of that classroom, and making sure that that child feels a sense of belonging to their community and to their classroom, and making sure that the teacher or teachers are going to be successful in that environment to be able to do that.
Thank you. My final question: what ideas might you explore to develop more revenue streams for Lake Orion Community Schools? Have you had success in procuring additional funds for your district in your career?
There are certainly different ways to go about that. And I think the first strategy to do is to make sure that you are a school community that really sustains property values and attracts families into the district, because that is the first strategy to secure your student enrollment. Making sure that you have that connectedness, making sure that you're meeting with realtors, you're understanding really kind of the aspect in terms of what parents are looking for. You'll see in my 90-day plan, I suggested that as one of the action steps to be able to really kind of collaborate with how people choose and to understand how families move into the area and what they're looking for when they come there. And in addition to that, in order to really make sure that you're maintaining and fostering a healthy student enrollment, what are those branding and marketing aspects that you have in place that really allows people to have a sense for the core beliefs of Lake Orion, and it attracts them to those programs, that they want to be there to be part of that community of schools. So I think that is probably the first and foremost in terms of building out different types of innovation platforms. There are various opportunities where you can look at creating programs that are specifically rigorous in nature, where you might open those up to schools of choice. I think one of those areas might even be as we move into a new iteration of what online learning might look like. I believe that's going to be opportunities for some districts to take a look at how that might be marketed differently beyond a couple years from now. And especially if you're going to end up using Lake Orion teachers as opposed to outsourcing the instructional format, it's going to be the Lake Orion teachers that makes that virtual program a Lake Orion program. That's how you move into that pedagogical design to make sure that that instruction matches with the type of objectives and the beliefs that we have as a district. Once you outsource that, it really starts to fade away and dissolve. However, if you were able to maintain that structure, once we first take care of the residents that might need to opt out this year, into the future, that might be an opportunity to explore to where you might use that particular program as a way to bring in more seats. You can do the same type of things in terms of like specific pathways or maybe opportunities that you have where you're bringing kids in for a very specific program. The other thing to do is to look at how might you partner with a foundation or a coalition to be able to help create revenue sources or scholarships that really kind of feed special programming. And so one of the ways, I was just in a meeting this week with the Bloomfield Hills Foundation as we explore new meaningful ways to support instruction. One of the challenges that we're going to have, to give you an example, is it's going to be really challenging to put kids in a classroom and have them singing. That is probably not something that we're going to be able to do in September. However, there is no way that I would allow something as important as a performing arts offering to be able to collapse. The performing arts is way too important. It is the center. It's often a cornerstone or a center feature of a community. So rather partnering with the foundation in terms of how can we retool our music department that maybe we're able to flip a classroom experience, and how might we have perhaps kids singing at home or playing their musical instrument at home, playing their saxophone at home, and then when they come together in class, they're now more of curators of using different types of technology to be able to put some of those features together in terms of what that design process would look like. You've probably seen Disney do some of those pieces, or you've seen a concert recently that looks like these Hollywood squares that we're living in right now. But I think that those are opportunities where you can preserve some of your programming that is that people feel the most passionate about, but you may not be able to let all that spit flow through a child's clarinet come September and have them in a room together. But you certainly wouldn't want to allow such an important feature of your community to be dissolved. And I think in that time, if you are doing different types of composites, that becomes an opportunity to be able to now send those digital formats out to the community, perhaps in a time that is really needed. And so I believe that just becomes an opportunity, and kind of get to Bridget's point with one of her questions about what do you take from our legacy, and then what are we learning right now that may be a design feature in the classroom as we move forward. Well, production may be one of those areas of innovation that we see in our performing arts programs as we move forward, because what we do know that production in the classroom in the physical sense as kids come back to school is going to be an important feature to be able to preserve those programmings. and having those technology, having the technology available to do that. And that's why it's important to be able to have some of those revenue streams, to your point, Jake, of making sure that in a crisis situation that you can be nimble enough that you can supply an entire department differently and allow them to live very successfully and preserving that into the future.
Great, thank you. We're gonna move to our last category of questions. You take a breath here. And it's staff and personnel, and our trustee, Steve Dracos, will be asking you those questions. Steve? Hey, Steve.
I'm not sure. I'm the one who should say you're on mute or not.
I'm sorry, let me repeat that. Good evening again. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yep.
All right, sir, please describe your most successful experience in building a high-performing work team. Thank you.
A high-performing
work team, for example.
Work team?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. I would say this is an area of strength for me. There are certainly, like anybody else, there are things that I don't do well. But a couple of things that I do very well is build a team and put together high functioning teams, and how you go about creating the conditions for people to thrive in those systems, creating those meaningful relationships, making sure that people have opportunities to come together. And so creating high functioning teams is something that, even going back to the classroom, that was probably my #1 strategy in the classroom was trying to create high functioning teams within that. And I don't think that strategy has changed. When you're working with adults, you want to do the exact same thing. You want to create high functioning teams. It takes a important level of trust to be able to do that. It takes building confidence in others. It becomes making sure that people are comfortable being able to give feedback, being able to contribute. So an example of perhaps maybe what that looks like, I can think of a couple different ways. Specifically drawing on from a building administrator experience, I remember we were heavily investigating some practices out of Project Zero, Harvard's Project Zero, specifically around agency by design, global competencies, and really kind of going back to the work on sophistication ratings for different types of thinking dispositions. And I know we haven't had an opportunity to really talk about any of that, but I would love the opportunity to really dig into instruction and some of those theories that sit within that. Because within those theories are also a lot of mechanisms that lean into building those high functioning teams, those liberating structures, those specific type of thinking routines that people thrive in, where they can be more imaginative and creative. I really feel like people misunderstand models of innovation. Oftentimes people think of like, oh, well, they might think of a Google and their slides in their lobby, or they think of something that's a little bit more flashy. But really, to create systems of innovation and high functioning teams, it also takes discipline. It takes what you do at your core, doing that very well, and then use that as the ability to be agile and nimble within the workplace when a new idea or a creative idea comes along, and to be able to move through that in a similar fashion. And I think that breeds success. People get invited into that, and once they have a, if you get a taste for that, you want to do that again. You want to work on the next project. You want to work on the next design. So I think that lives within those models, And while you're doing that, Steve, I think you are modeling what you hope to see in a classroom as well. So some of those bond projects that we talked about, there was a lot of intention to model instructional practices while we are engaging stakeholders so that they could understand what it looks like to teach towards students thinking in the classroom and to move them into innovative designs of thought processes.
Thank you. My next question is regarding for labor relations. Please speak to your experience in labor relations and working with employee unions and describe the nature of your relationship with union leaders. Thank you.
So you'll see that in my 90-day plan, I'm pretty sure that I listed every bargaining unit that I would want to reach out to the president or maybe lead representative, which would be, yeah. And I think establishing that two-way communication, I know, you know, the union president that I work with here in Bloomfield Hills, you know, he is just a text away, and it's important to be able to work together on issues. It's important that you work in a collaborative fashion and that you really kind of understand our priorities, because our goal really is the same. We want to have meaningful experiences and we want to be student-centered. And so how we become collaborative in that process to ensure that that's what's going to happen is very important that we do that, because oftentimes those differences often sit with just misunderstandings. So it's very important to be open, to be able to lean into those conversations, to be able to listen, and to be collaborative in that process. And so in my 90-day plan, I highlighted some of those action steps in terms of making sure that I was going to reach out to each one of those leader representatives to make sure that they knew that they had an open line of communication to me directly at any point.
Thank you, Todd. And my final question is, how would you interact with central administrators and building principals in a district of our size? And how would you strike a balance between giving them the support and independence they need to lead effectively while holding them accountable as appropriate and necessary? Thank you, sir.
And I think both of those are very important. And you know, it's interesting. I have been in districts smaller than yours, and I've been in districts much larger than yours. And I think I would be able to bring that set of varied experiences into Lake Orion, and that perspective of being outside of Lake Orion and bringing that in and those fresh eyes can really be an opportunity to be able to set course and a focus that maybe didn't exist before. It creates new opportunity. So I think I come with a wide set or array of different experiences, and I would be able to use all of those in terms of how I might go about striking that balance in terms of supporting central office and building administration, as well as setting high expectations. And I actually think that that's how you do both. People thrive with high expectations. They thrive with clarity. They thrive with understanding what the moral imperative is in front of us. What is it that should, you know, because every school year presents itself with a whole list of things that you have to do. And within that, you get to choose what it is that you're going to do extraordinarily well. And coming together in terms of what that's going to look like starts to set expectation and focus direction. I think that comes with check-ins, regular check-ins. You'll see in my 90-day plan, I put in a really kind of a descriptor of what that would look like. So I believe that's regular check-in with building principals, making sure that I am conducting cabinet meetings, that I am understanding of the various committees, making sure that I'm working directly with each department, making sure that I'm not only consulting the work, but I'm engaged and a meaningful participant in the work, that I'm sitting in the work with them and I'm a participant. I think the district, the size of Lake Orion Community Schools, I think the superintendency is not just a political position. Of course, if you're running a school district with 20,000 or with 20,000 students, there's little time for that superintendent to be hands-on or active with project planning, because that's a whole different ball game. And I think that's what attracts me to Lake Orion, is it's the right size for me to stay meaningful, engaged in the work. Because at the end of the day, that's really what drives me. I thoroughly enjoy teaching and learning. I would not want to be pulled away from that. I would not want to be pulled away from the classroom. And I think that this is just a right size district that I would still be able to have those meaningful experiences and be able to engage with students and teaching and learning, and to be in and out of buildings, and to be making connections with building administration, as well as helping lead central office.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We're here at the home stretch, last few minutes, and we've been asking all the questions, and this is your time. If you have a question you'd like to ask us, or just your time for a closing statement, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm going to finish right where I started, which was thank you for allowing me the opportunity to sit with you this evening. It feels as though the last few months it has been 24/7, 70 hours a week, responding to a global pandemic. And it's a rare opportunity to engage in other conversation, especially around teaching and learning. I would love to sit with you and talk about nothing else but instruction. At this point, I can almost feel myself hungry to be able to do that. Of course, that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of work and preparation to still work through to make sure that we're ready and we're providing the best chance possible for all kids to return to school. I talked about different type of philosophies or theories that I have. But what I didn't necessarily have the opportunity is to talk about the life experiences that have shaped me. And there are specific things that I believe has situated me into a position to be able to lead people in a very effective manner, in a meaningful manner, in one that really builds trust and relationships, and allows for innovative thought and comfort and a sense of belonging. And there are some things that are very passionate to my core. One is around special education and being the father of a child with special needs. That's something that I carry on my sleeve all the time. I know firsthand the experience of that. And that's a perspective that you only have if you have cared for a child with special needs. I understand what that's like to hold your child when he's having a seizure. And so what that means is when parents are sitting in front of me, having that same difficulty, I'm able to empathize in a very different way. I used to think that I chose education, that, I wanted to be a teacher and I was going to launch into it. But, as you get older, you start to realize the factors that were at play. And I can think back to my second grade teacher, Mrs. Anderson, that made sure that I had food. She was almost like the first addition to Blessings in a Backpack, in terms of if somebody's hungry in my classroom, I'm going to make sure that they have something to eat. And I think about all of those life experiences and challenges, as well as devoting my life to really kind of helping children succeed. I realize now that really this is my opportunity to give back to a way that I found my own path forward, which was through pursuing education, and to almost model after the teachers that had the greatest impact on me. And I think having a superintendency puts me in a very specific way, puts me in a situation where I can support the Mrs. Andersons that are out there. They're helping their children. They're trying to do the right things for the right reasons. And the prospect of being in Lake Orion is very exciting to me. And I think one of the things that you would get is a perspective of having been in different places, being able to look at system-wide levels. I think one of the areas of strengths that I have is building systems that are agile, nimble, innovative, and understanding that comes from creating very different and specific design structures, as well as processes that moves people into those positions. Different types of strategic planning processes that really produces those type of conditions. So thank you for the conversation. You know, one of the areas that I'll be looking for if I come back, I am interested in what your kindergarten enrollment might be right now. I know the numbers that I'm looking at, I believe, are hinting towards the percentage of families that might be considering to opt out next year, and the importance is going to be to have a program in place to be able to attend to that. I could see where families of very young children may not opt to put their 5-year-old either in a school where people are wearing masks, or maybe they're not going to put them in school because they just don't want them exposed to COVID. So either one of those scenarios, I think we need to plan for to make sure that we're preserving those FTEs and building out a program that is going to be meaningful. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Bidlack. We appreciate your interest in the superintendent position for Lake Orion Community Schools. As I'm sure you're aware, the board's interviewing 6 candidates. We plan to conduct second interviews next week, and we will be able to let you know Thursday night where you're at in the search process. And once again, thank you for participating in the first round, and we wish you well. And good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. That concludes night number 2 of our first round of interviews with our 3rd and 4th candidates. And we will resume this journey tomorrow night, again at 6 o'clock, with our 2 final first round interviews. And as I go over here, any closing comments? Yes, Birgit.
I just want to acknowledge that I know there are people watching from home and that they have the opportunity to make comments that they'll submit. And I just want the people to know that we are receiving those, so they are being heard. I just want to reassure the community of that. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. All right. On that note, thank you, board, for hanging in there. It's been a long evening, and we'll have one more. Scott?
I was just wondering, John had spoke yesterday about perhaps tomorrow after the interviews, we're going to talk about our process for Thursday. Is that the plan? I mean, I guess I'm curious to see how we're going to collaborate over all this data that we have from these different people. Like, what's the process for that?
John?
A recommendation, and we can certainly discuss it, would be that at the end of the evening tomorrow, I mean, you have the opportunity now to pour over the information that you do have on all of the candidates, including your notes. I know that you're taking notes. So you'll have the application materials that were submitted, the AppleTrack application, resume, cover letter. You've seen that the candidates have been submitting additional materials. You'll have the chance to review very carefully. I always suggest that you go back over your own interview notes after you get through the 6 interviews, just to refresh your memory and compare and contrast as well, and to carefully consider the feedback that you're getting from your stakeholders also. It's your decision, but what they have to say and how they're reacting is important as well. And then given all of that, I'd like to remind people that while you're still not selecting your superintendent yet, you're obviously narrowing the field down to 2 finalists. And then you're going to be scrutinizing those 2 finalists much more carefully to make sure that when you're poised to make your final decision, you're making a wise one. So what I'd ask you to do coming into Thursday is be prepared to go around member by member and to indicate, having reflected on everything at that moment, where your thoughts are in terms of the 2 candidates that you would prefer to see advance in the process, and to be able to speak to why. As I always ask, we want to be careful to keep that kind of in the positive realm. We're not going to be talking about what we don't like about candidates or where we may feel they fall short. But I would ask you to certainly advocate for the two folks that you feel most strongly about and to be able to speak to why. And I would ask too, I think it's really important that you frame that in terms of the candidate profile in particular, so that as you're speaking about those two people that you would like to see move forward, what is it about them that you feel makes them the closest fit to that candidate profile? And I think once all board members then have had the chance to reveal their thinking, I would ask that you keep a bit of an open mind. You may come into the meeting with the thought that you've got two people in mind, but it could be that when you hear from your colleagues and why they support others, you know, it could make you potentially have a change of heart. If there are three people you feel strongly about, it's close, and there's kind of a close call between the final two, what you hear from your colleagues
Your time's up.
may make a difference.
Right.
So what that may reveal, it may be as simple as when all seven of you have had the chance to express how you feel, it may be very clear that two candidates have kind of risen to the forefront, and then it would take a motion from somebody to advance those two candidates. You can have additional discussion once the motion is supported, and then you would take a vote. If it's not that evident, I'll take you through a process of kind of circling back and going through until we do hopefully have two people that you'd like to see advance to the final round. Does that make sense, Scott?
Yes, thank you.
To clarify, that work will be conducted on Thursday.
That's right.
Not Wednesday after we conclude the last two interviews.
I think you smartly, you know, by the time you get to the end of the night tomorrow, you're going to be exhausted, right?
Mhm.
And for good reason. This is very intense. You've got to pay such close attention. You need to take copious notes. So it really is smart to walk away from this, get some rest, have an additional opportunity to consider the feedback that may still be coming in, and have the chance to really make a very thoughtful decision about who advances in this process. So I'm really pleased that you decided to come back an extra night, and I think that's absolutely the smart thing to do.
All right. Any other questions, comments? I thank all of you once again, and this meeting is adjourned. Have a good evening.
You too, sir.